Okay, we are going to get started. Sorry that we're starting late here this evening. Roll call.
Yes. Mendoza. Here. Halpern.
Here.
Chow. Here. Hanyabudi.
Here.
Hernandez.
Here.
Hertha.
Here. At this time, we will open the floor for the public hearing on the 2017-18 District 65 and Park School budgets pursuant to Illinois School Code. Tentative budgets for Evanston-Skokie School District 65 and for the joint agreement for the operation of Park School were presented to the board on August 21st, 2017, and were on display for more than 30 days. A notice published in the local media announced that the board would hold this hearing. If there is anyone in the audience who wishes to address the board regarding the tentative budgets, they are asked to step to the podium at this time.
Good evening. Okay. Good evening. My name is Jim Young, and I just had some comments that I'd like to share with the board and the community about the budget. I attended a hearing that Dr. Gorn and the team hosted at Haven about 3 weeks ago, and at that meeting, Dr. Gorn mentioned that over the last several years that nobody comes up to speak about the budget. So I thought that was an invitation which I took. So Dr. Gorn, thank you very much. Be aware of what you wish for. I think that I'm very pleased that the community overwhelmingly approved the referendum. This is incredibly important for District 65 and for the Evanston community overall. I think that, however, having said that, I hope that the board and the administration don't become complacent. The problems that we're addressing have not been solved. And I would like to, before I get into some specific comments, I would like to just communicate my utmost respect and regard for the hard work and effort demonstrated by all members of the District 65 staff. The 65 schools would not be where they are today without the dedication of this board, the administration, teachers, and all staff. So I thank you very much. I'd also like to thank the press. Here today we have Charles Bartling from the Evanston Now, and we have Larry Gavin from the Roundtable. And Larry's article that was back a little while ago highlights the issue. And with a referendum where we have not solved the structural deficit, all we've done is push it off into the future. So for the next 4 years, the district's going to be flush with cash. And so that is going to pose some other challenges that you may have, and that is people are going to think that you've got unlimited money, unlimited new programs, that you can just spend money. However, that's not the case, because as Larry highlights in red, the following 4 years, you run into a deficit. So basically, unless things change in how the board and the administration looks at the budget, how they look at running the institution, in about 7 years, we're going to be coming back to the community for another referendum. So I think that's something very important for the community to understand. I think it's very important for the board and the administration to recognize. And I think that's something that has to be seriously considered as to how do you want to address this today? Do you want to go back in 7 years and ask the community for another referendum? Or can we change and think about how we're currently running the District 65? And of course, as we think about how you're running District 65 and being fiscally responsible, you have to recognize that 80% of the budget comes from salaries and benefits, and that doesn't include pension costs too. So when you think about it's my recollection that the average District 65 teachers today paid around $78,000 a year with another $22,000 in benefits. But if you capitalize the true cost of the defined benefit pension plan, that's another $10,000. So total compensation is $110,000. Now the projections listed in the budget suggest that over the next 8 years, that salaries are going to assume to grow, continue at a continued 3.5% to 4% rate, similar to the last 10 years. And just for context, in the community, the median household income in Evanston over the last 10 years has grown at about 1%. So this is going to be a challenge for the board and the administration to deal with, and to think about how you're going to be fiscally responsible over the next 8 years. So with that, I just want to say, again, thank you for all your hard work and dedication, and I really appreciate everything that's done for the schools.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay, so we'll have an opportunity to, as a board, discuss later on in the agenda. Rebecca, you've got the next.
Yes, I move that the Board of Education approve tonight's meeting agenda as presented.
Second.
Mendoza,
Yes.
Halpern,
Yes.
Chow,
Yes.
Tanya Vudi,
Yes.
Hernandez,
Yes.
Cartha.
Yes. Right. Dr. Gorin, do you want to?
Yeah, good evening. I have a few comments as we kick off the meeting tonight. First of all, I just want to offer my thanks to everyone who's been involved in the opening of the schools, really to underscore the hardworking staff for all that they've done to ensure a smooth start. We have had a few hiccups here and there, but on the whole, we've had a really good start to the school year, and thanks go to our principals and teachers and secretaries and custodians and central office staff for their dedication and warm welcome they've provided to students and to families. Most recently, during this month, we've had 2 meetings with D65 families to share information about our two-way immersion, our TWE program, and the need to consider program expansion. Materials from this meeting, including the presentations and frequently asked questions in both English and Spanish, are now available on our website. I want to thank Stacy Beardsley and our curriculum team for hosting these sessions and engaging families in this important discussion that will be continuing throughout the fall. Special thanks and kudos to the number of schools across the district that really made a true effort to help our neighbors and fellow Americans that were impacted by Hurricanes Harvey and Irma. I'm proud of our teachers, principals, and families for everything that they're doing to help students learn about kindness and compassion in the face of natural disasters and in some ways tragedy. In addition, Bessie Rhodes, Lincoln, Lincolnwood, Washington, and Willard have hosted fundraisers and other events in support of those in need. Schools across the district have provided thousands of dollars for relief efforts, and I'm sincerely grateful, as we all are, for the work that we're doing for those who have been impacted. We do have so much to celebrate across our district. Teachers, administrators, and educational support staff who are going above and beyond for our students and families each and every day. I'm really excited to announce that this fall we will be launching a new recognition program called High Five to honor the hard work and dedication of our D65 team members. First Bank and Trust has graciously agreed to partner with us to make this program possible, and more details will be coming in the next couple of weeks. Just to provide a bit of an equity update, as I do in each of our meetings, we hosted our first Beyond Diversity session of the school year these past weeks. 33 people attended. We are currently working to schedule dates for the remainder of the school year, and more than 250 people who work in the district have volunteered to attend this year. We also held the first meeting of 3 of our 7 seed cohorts. One of these cohorts is the first to include both staff and parents. We've opened 4 cohorts this year to a hybrid staff-parent model. In the spirit of citywide collaboration on equity, we've also opened 2 of the cohorts to District 202 staff. Building on the work with principals and district leaders over the summer. Can we work on that feedback? Let me pause for a second.
They're calling I checked, they're calling the person, he's not there,
Okay.
so they're gonna.
So excuse us for those of you in the audience and for those of you listening at home. We do have feedback and we're doing the best we can. Building on work with principals and district leaders over the summer, we held the first in a series of equity-related professional learning opportunities for our principals and district leaders just this past week. The session focused on the use of the racial impact assessment tool, and we're going to continue to work on that tool during the school year. And then finally, our family engagement specialist, Ellen Urigaga, is settling into her new role. Ellen's work this year is focused primarily on working directly with individual District 65 families. She is also working alongside several parent volunteers to host a series of parent classes and workshops that began this week. These workshops include parents as educational partners and computer classes offered in partnership with the Evanston Public Library. And we're really excited about Ellen's work and Ellen's work with many of our families in the district. And with that, I conclude my comments.
Do any other board members have comments?
I just wanted to share, I ran into some parents yesterday, they were, so they're part of an organization called the Asociación de Familias Hispanas de Washington. So it's a Latino parent and family affinity group. And just echoing or building upon what Paul was saying in regards to folks who experienced, a lot of despair because of the recent natural disasters that have been occurring. This group is actually trying to raise money through donations to send like sanitary wipes, diapers to families out in Mexico and in Puerto Rico. So again, I think the contact person over there who, is Marcos Alcaine Soto, who helps convene meetings with that group. So just wanted to put that out there to folks in the community.
Thank you. Anybody?
I just want to echo the appreciation for all the parents and the community members that came out, not only to the budget session, and thank you to the speaker today for coming in, reiterating some of the information that he shared with us that night, but also for the two-way immersion sessions. These forums are for parents and for the community, so I just wanted to, again, thank the people that did come out. The feedback that was received that night is invaluable to us and gives us a different a lens as we make decisions. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Just a couple of things that I wanted to mention for my colleagues around the table here. You will notice in your folders a blue meeting evaluation form following the retreats that we've had and some of the discussions we've had about how we can monitor our performance. We created this form, so if all board members and staff, cabinet who's around the table, if you can also fill this out before you leave tonight and hand it to me, we will use the feedback that we get to monitor our meetings and to continuously improve them and make sure that they are productive and efficient. The other thing I wanted to note is community members will note that we have the public comment time as normal coming up. We have removed the informal comment period at the end of meetings. Part of this is in an attempt to keep our meetings efficient, and we've never had that many comments at the end of the night anyway, but in recognition of the fact that we don't want to seem like we're trying to remove the ability for the community to communicate with us. We are going to start implementing community cafes for board members, similar to what Dr. Gorin has been doing, started last year. Dr. Gorin has community cafes set up every other month. So on those off months, board members, we're set up a schedule where 2 board members will do community cafes that we hope that community members will come and engage with us, and we'll have discussions about things that are happening and ways that we can work together to improve the district and improve our practices. So keep an eye out. We were still refining the scheduling for that, but keep an eye out for that coming up soon. And with that, we will move on to public comments. Members of the public are welcome and invited to address the board during open public meetings. The Board of Education will not permit the voicing of personal attacks against any district employee. Please remember to state your name and that you have 3 minutes to address the board. Barry Doyle? Ah, thank you.
My name is Barry Doyle. My son, Patrick Doyle, is a kindergartner at Orrington School. He's a special ed student. He was involved in the SPAC program starting in the 2014-15 school year after spring break. What I've come to address the board about is our inability to get kids to school on time who are getting bus services. We're part of the special ed program. When Patrick started in the SPAC program, we were encouraged to put him on the bus. That would serve as a transition time. And so we went ahead and we put him on the bus, and it came to our attention that he was getting dropped off by the bus 15 to 30 minutes after the start of the scheduled school day for a 2.5-hour program. My wife and I sent some emails in, and the problem was rectified, and I thought, well, that's strange. Why would you ever set up a bus schedule that would bring kids in 15 to 30 minutes after the start of the school day? And the problem got fixed, and I thought, well, hey, this was a blip, and thankfully it's been rectified. So fast forward to the start of this school year. Patrick is a kindergartner at Orrington. He's supposed to be getting bused from our home, which is by Lincolnwood School, over to Orrington. That first day of school, I drove Patrick to school. He and I were standing next to his teacher waiting to be brought in for the start of the school day, and kids start filing into school, and me and Patrick are the only ones standing there with Miss Iverson. And Miss Iverson looks at me and goes, bus must be late again, let's get going. So me and Patrick went to school, and we were the only ones there to start the school day. I was a little upset about this, and there's a parents Facebook group for the special ed parents, and I put a post up and I said, should my head just be exploding over this? I can't believe that they're late on the first day of school. And the feedback I got from the other parents who are involved in this group is basically, this is how things go at District 65. We don't get kids to school on time to start the school year who get these bus services. And it's a little disheartening because the parents I've come to know through this special ed group are people who are really pretty fierce advocates for their kids. The teachers who teach these kids work very hard to make sure that these kids do the best that they can. And the fact that everyone's spirit seems to be broken, that they don't have the expectation that, yes, we can get our kids to school on time, is a little disheartening. Perhaps I'm just new to the fight and a fresh body involved in this, but I'm not prepared to be quiet about this. The way I view it is we've got two basic jobs when it comes to busing our kids to school: to get them there safely and get them there on time. I have absolutely no complaints at all about them getting there safely. No problems at all. But the fact that we can't get kids to school on time, starting on day one, is a complete failure on the part of the administration and everyone who's involved in setting this up. There are, one of the basic life skills that we're teaching kids in school is to get places on time. And if we aren't getting kids to school on time the first day of school, we're also telling them that the adults who are in charge of your education, really don't think that your education is important enough to get you to school on time. And that's just wrong. Patrick has an IEP. He has specific rights to a full day's education. And we use the term, he has rights very loosely, but he has actual specific legal rights. And when you're dropping him off to school after the start of the school day, you can't be delivering everything that he's entitled to under his IEP and under the law.
Thank you, sir.
Let me just finish.
Okay, just,
You know, you're handicapping, our educators, the frontline people who are actually delivering the education, when, you're not delivering, getting these kids to school on time. When I get communications from the district, every child, every day, whatever it takes, if we aren't dropping them off at school on time,
thank you.
It makes my head want to explode.
Thank you, sir. Liz Ribeiro? Liz? Oh, there you are, thanks.
Pulling up my notes here. Yes, hi, good evening. My name is Liz Ribeiro. I'm a District 65 parent and a mother of two. I'm here tonight to talk to you as well about issues of transportation, also communication, transparency, finances, and support. Let me start with a simple explanation and provide you with the details. My son is enrolled in the PM Pre-K program here at JEH. And now 3 weeks into the school year, he's being denied transportation support of a split route. He was given a split route last year. We were promised one this year, and we've planned our lives accordingly. You may be wondering, what is a split route? My son attends daycare 3 days a week and is at home 2 days a week. A split route allows him to be picked up at home on home days and daycare on daycare days. Your next question might be, why would anyone need this? Well, in our case, my husband and I both work, and my husband works out in Des Plaines and therefore cannot help with transportation at all. I have 2 jobs. I work full-time running the youth ministry at a church here in Evanston, and part-time as a manager at a department store. Despite us having 2.5 jobs, we can barely afford to live in the community that we were both raised in. Our property taxes went up 30% this year. As I mentioned earlier, my son was on a split route last year. We had paid another annual fee to daycare in August, as we were told that they were working on our routes. We had several back and forth conversations with the transportation department, and I have all the details on who we spoke to on which days, but I'll skip over that part. I have it available for you if you would like it. We emailed back and forth and waited. Each day I was forced to leave work and pick up my son twice a day and transport him across town, working on the assumption that this was going to be fixed. Each day this has added an additional hour and a half to my day, not to mention gas, additional time away from my family in the evening, as it of course has extended my work day. In the process, my son has been late to school twice. I was once late to pick him up. He's also missed an entire day of school already. I wish I could do this for him, but I simply cannot. I'm only one person. I can only be in one place at a time. I stopped by the office, continued to get some back and forth, and then eventually, just a couple days ago, finally told, no, we are not doing split routes at all. And I find it very upsetting, because in this back and forth around and about the office, several parties would not give me information about who was actually making these decisions and who I could go to. Finally, after saying that the lack of transparency was simply unacceptable, my husband did receive a phone call from a upper administrator. Then the eventual thing that ended up getting told to us is that it's a safety issue, which I don't really understand, because my son is on a modified route as we speak now. He's on a 2-day-a-week route. That in and of itself is a modified route. So I don't understand how a 2-day-a-week modification is any different than adding him on to the secondary route. And then we were told that there were safety concerns, that children were being transported randomly to the wrong schools and left there. To me, that's not acceptable, that we would just say, well, there's a safety issue, so we're going to cut services, rather than addressing what the logistical concerns are in regard to them. And I will echo the other community members' statement, every child, every day, no matter what it takes. If my son is denied transportation, he's effectively being denied an education. It is too late for him to enroll in any other school. We wouldn't be able to afford it anyhow, as we've missed any chance to apply for financial aid. And according to the district's transportation website, that they will provide transportation to any student who resides 1.5 miles or more from the attendance area of the school, or where it would constitute a serious safety hazard. Both of those are our case. To be clear, I'm not asking for an exception. I'm asking for the issue to be addressed globally for all students and all families. I'm here today not only speaking for my son, but also for any parent who could not come because they too work multiple jobs. I'm coming to remind the board about the importance of early childhood education. Children are given the opportunity to get a preschool education, see the trajectory of their lives positively affected. Of course, I'm sure you know, as your extensive investment in cradle to career, but skills such as socialization, holistic development, concept of cooperation, enthusiasm for lifelong learning, and respect, teamwork, resilience, concentration, patience, confidence and self-esteem, and exposure to diversity not only affect their lives, but they affect the communities that they live in. These decisions to deny or provide services to our children affect everyone. I'm still wondering, where does the buck stop? Who makes these decisions and how? Thank you.
Thank you. Jim, you're listed again, I thank you. Okay. All right. We will continue on. Joey, you've got the motion.
Before we move, just for new board member question, we have public comment, and I know that there's probably a process for how statements are then followed up on by the appropriate team members. Can you just share kind of how that works?
I've taken notes down, and I will work with the senior team that is addressing the issue, and we can get back to both citizens. I'm assuming we have your emails and whatever, and that's how we typically address.
Thank you. I move that the Board of Education accept the recommendations outlined in the attached group motion and approve the personnel appointments, leaves, and separations, the August 2017 Board of Education and Committee meeting minutes, destruction of August 2015 closed session audio recordings, July-August 2017 list of bills, treasurer's report, and budget amendment, and the gift acceptance to District 65.
Second.
Second.
Mendoza,
Yes.
Halpern,
Yes.
Chow,
Yes.
Tanya Vudi,
Yes.
Hernandez,
Yes.
Cartha,
Yes. Sergio, you've got the,
I move that the Board of Education adopt the final 2018 budgets, including aggregate expenses for the operation of Park School as presented.
second.
Second.
We have discussion?
Yes. Do we have a presentation, or can we just go to questions? Okay.
Discuss the changes. Yeah. We can discuss the changes to the budget.
Okay. So you want to do that, and then we'll go to...
Yes, so since the budget was presented to the Finance Committee and to the board in August, there were some changes made to revenues and expenditures. And I just want to refer to Table 1 in your packet. Overall revenues decreased by $176,000, primarily because of the reduced amount of CPPRT, which stands for Corporate Personal Property Replacement Tax. State reduced its fiscal year 18 allocation. And the reason that the school districts were given, because it was done across, were weaker business profits, larger business refunds, and also some statutory transfers from that fund. So it was a substantial amount. For us, it was over $500,000. There was an increase in state aid due to additional funding for Family Center, and one of the grants was, state grants was increased. Luckily, we were able to offset some of those losses from CPPRT with reduced benefits. So the final education funding bill, Senate Bill 1947, did not include pension cost shift. So we were able to remove $330,000 from the final budget. We are keeping it in the projections, but it's not in the FY18 budget. Also, we received some really good news about TRS federal. It's in a way a penalty that's being paid on every dollar paid to us from federal government. It's called pension, but it really has nothing to do with anyone's pension. So that was that cost was removed by $450,000. So as you can see in the table, there was a substantial amount in the benefits of almost $800,000, and there were also adjustments, increases in salaries due to additional positions that were added due to student needs, and some salary adjustments, as well as some increases in purchase services and supplies and materials. So overall, a very small change to the bottom line, only $70,000 decrease in the excess of in our surplus that we are planning to use to set aside and to use to cover future deficits. So overall expenditures decreased by $100,000.
And let me just say that embedded in the budget is the resolution, the unanimous resolution by the board to govern how we use the referendum dollars that we are collecting, so that as we collect the dollars, we will have the dollars in the out years, especially in year 5, 6, 7, and 8. And so that will, so as Mr. Young came forward and said, we have a lot of cash, but those resources are actually set aside for the 4 out years that go beyond, that lead us up to 8 years of being financially stable.
Correct, and I also want to point out that, and we are very thankful to Mr. Young for his comments, that we understand the importance of structural deficit. He's absolutely correct. That did not go away, and the district will be working this year. We're not going to be waiting 8 years. We're going to be working this year on priority budgeting. We'll be reviewing our expenditures, our staffing, to make sure that these efficiencies are addressed immediately. So we are not surprised at the end of fiscal year 25 that here the money ran out and we have no money. We'll be proactive.
To that end, what I would also like to add to that is I think we as a district, we need to have a philosophical question as far as what we want our district to look like. As Mr. Young correctly pointed out, 80% of our expenditure is tied in to personnel costs. So in order to get to that fundamental structural deficit, we have to really have that conversation to see what do we want to look like going out. Because we can cut on the edges, but the fundamental area where we have savings is in personnel. So I just wanted to put that out there as a conversation that we need to have, if not now, in the future.
Thank you. We had questions? Candace?
I just had a couple comments and questions, and first I'll thank you, Rafael, for posing that question. I know Jim has left, but it is important to say that while we did not eliminate the structural deficit, we did affect the structural deficit prior to going into the referendum, and that was through the good work with our colleagues, the educators, so that we could tie salary increases to the consumer price index. So while we did not eliminate it, we have made a very important movement towards that end. and that is reflected in the out years of the projections, at least only through those years in which we have a negotiated agreement with our debt colleagues, and that's for a 3-year period. So it's certainly safe to say that there still is a structural deficit, but we have made inroads into trying to address the slope of that deficit, and I think that's an important caveat. To the point about, the promise that we have made of the referendum, I just wanted to kind of note some things that I observed in looking at the changes from the original budget to what our final budget is. And certainly $70,000 as a net deficit isn't a huge amount of money. That is $70,000 that's going to cut into the referendum proceeds. And what that does is, if you look into it in the piece parts, when I first saw, it's wonderful news that we don't have the pension cost shift and that the federal TRF monies are now, we're going to have to spend less on that. So jointly, that is $800,000 of savings, and my first reaction was, oh great, that can go to the bank essentially to start extending, our ability to not reach deficit positions. Clearly, it's countered here. CPRT, we can't control over that. So I certainly think, the 537,000 in some ways, gets somewhat washed with our 782,000 in reduced expenditures, but there is still a difference there that we're making up with additional expenses. So I just want us to be cognizant that by adding whatever, and I don't know what these represent, but by adding $283,000 in salaries, $189,000 in purchase services, and $205,000 in supplies and materials. I think that one's linked to revenue, actually, on funded revenue, so that probably doesn't apply. But the other two categories are net increases in infrastructure, and the spirit of our policy was that if it was going to cut into our referendum monies, that we were not going to, invest in that unless we really talked about that. So I think it's important that the board understand that with a net $70,000 deficit, we are in fact already chipping into the money that we have promised to save for future years in a very small way, but it concerns me that we are doing that. And I don't know what the trade-offs are. But I think this is exactly the conversation that needs to happen, and we can't shy away from it, because as Jim also said, there are lots of ways that we would love to use our monies, right? So I guess the question beyond all those comments are, are these expenses, additional expenses, mission critical, and are they worthy of using funding that we have promised the community that we are going to save for future years? And so I just put that back to you guys in the broadest terms.
Yes, they're mission critical. Some of these are adjustments that we made with student population coming in and with some special needs classes that we have. Some of the costs are around our equity agenda, and which we're making a commitment to. And we're cognizant as well. I think the key point that you're making, which I think is really key, is $70,000 doesn't seem like a lot, but it is. And it would be a different conversation if this were $700,000. But we need to be paying attention to that, which we do. And the adjustments that we made on some of the staffing, again, is meeting critical needs that we have in our classrooms.
Okay. I think the larger question then is to, there's a couple core areas, and I had mentioned this in my email. So if we're seeing huge variances, like in consulting services, can we share, and this may come to the point around, as part of our equity agenda, having a budget attached to that. Because if we're making those investments, it's important for the community to know we're making those investments, and that is part and parcel of why this may have shifted some. But we've made a roughly, $300,000, $200,000 increase in consulting services.
Right.
I believe that's associated with our equity agenda.
Correct.
So when we'll be able to, Sorry.
And some grants, it's really half and half. So some of this increase in consulting services is due to, it's actually funded with grant funds.
I can't hear what you're saying.
What Kathy is saying
I just can't hear her, sorry.
Not all the funds are local funds. Some of the funds are grant. The consulting increase are grant funding, which depending on the grantor, which most of the federal government, we have to spend it like that. So it doesn't really hit our bottom line because it's a flow through from the federal government to us. So that accounts for some of the increases.
So there was a net 200,000 roughly increase, correct? 200 and something?
Correct.
And how much of that is
So the equity, the portion that's attributed to local or equity services about 100,000. The rest is, I think it's about 75,000 is related to various grants. We did receive either additional funding or additional new grants, and we have to spend it. Otherwise, we have to return the
understand
funding.
that.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, saving the grant money doesn't result in any net savings for us.
No, I understand.
It's a loss of the funding that we move back.
Okay. So I know we will be talking about the equity implementation plan, and I think it would be great to have the full associated budget, because that gives us a full picture of what our commitment is, as well as our commitment in time, effort, resources.
Any other questions or comments?
I would love, Raphael, to your comment of our priorities, like having to figure out our priorities in the structural spending. It's one thing to have to debate or choose where the priorities lie when your back's against the wall, like last April, up against a referendum vote. I think the conversation is much different and much more tempered when you're having the conversation and it's not against the wall. I think it might be a good function for this board at a finance committee meeting with your guidance to talk about not only where we're spending all of our money, but from an educator's perspective, the values on where that money is going, and making sure that we understand the hierarchy and the must-haves, and when pension costs do shift, when there is something that changes, and we're pushed to find places to save, to have already had the brainstorming done prior to that process. And I think that's an important behavior for us to think about, but I think we need to talk about it now while it looks like we're flush with cash, even though we're not.
We'd be happy to do that. I mean, and in many ways, even though we were approaching the referendum and getting closer and closer, we had some time a year ago, even a year and a half ago, to really dive deep into what we called the structural deficit. And so we can continue to talk about that, and then talk about positive solutions. How do we move forward on that?
Yeah.
So, go ahead. I agree it's important for us to think about the $70,000, even though it's a small percentage of the overall budget. I think it's also important for us to not be too narrow, as in thinking that the $70,000 only represents additional consulting fees. Like, there's a lot of investments in our budget. And this is $70,000. That could be $70,000 of supplies, that could be $70,000, any number of things that we think are important, but that we also, in the long term, may decide that we want to invest in differently in order to not dip into referendum dollars. But I just want to make sure that we're not having a binary conversation about those dollars, because the budget is large and complex, and it's not a binary issue.
Sorry if those were two separate questions for me. Sorry if it came linked together. It's just because I was looking at where the big variances were in spending, and that came up. But obviously the clear difference here is any of these expenses that have increased. That's why it's making the 70,000. In fact, I don't know where consulting would be in that. I don't even know if it's in purchase services, I guess. So.
And if
So it's a
I may-
good point. I'm sorry if it sounded like I was connecting the two.
If I may go back to a point Candace made earlier, the corporate property replacement tax is something we couldn't control. So that becomes under a larger issue of state uncertainties, which we're certain we're going to face somewhere along the way. We don't know what they are. And so that's the other way to be disciplined in this conversation, that in this particular case, we were able to mitigate it to a certain extent, but we don't know what the next uncertainty is. And so we're going to have to be poised to be transparent and to be engaged around this table with what happens when the state does whatever they do.
And I think it's important to note that the CPPRT is a recurring loss that we will have. It's not just for this year. Correct?
That's correct.
Correct.
Is that true also of the TRF savings? Is that something that?
We are hoping. We are hoping,
don't know
but
yet.
that number is updated every single year.
Okay.
We find out from TRS what the percentage is.
Okay.
So what is really an attempt to do is, we know our pension for teachers is underfunded. And the state doesn't have the money to pay for it. So what the state is doing is using federal money to kind of shore it up. That's essentially what it boils down to. But this year, they were able to lower it to 10.10 from 44.61.
Okay.
So what is going to happen next year, we really don't know.
Got it. Thank you. All right. Can we go ahead and do the vote on this?
Mendoza,
Yes.
Halpern,
Yes.
Chow,
Yes.
Tanya Vudi,
Yes.
Hernandez,
Yes.
Cartha,
Yes. Okay, and now we will move on to our discussion items, the first of which is our curriculum review, arts and library. Stacy, do you want to start us off with that?
Thank you very much. Essentially, in May, we had a quick conversation about curriculum review, and I had an opportunity to address the board about the curriculum review work that we've been doing over the past year. Tonight, because when we attempted to do this presentation in May, we were rather late an hour. Our curriculum chairs did not have an opportunity to share some of the work that they've been doing. So as a brief kind of introduction, just to reconnect us to this work, District 65 drafted and initiated a curriculum review process about 1.5 years ago. That curriculum review process is an 8-year cycle where we take an intensive look at a curriculum every 8 years in regards to the curriculum itself and whether we need to replace or revise in a more intensive way. This process is a 4-step process. When we dig in, we really do some research and some initial development around the curriculum. We then move into a design phase. And then once we've gone through the design phase, we do first-year implementation and alignment. And then the remaining years are really spent in the ongoing monitoring and revision phase, because curriculum truly is never done. You know, we have a curriculum that we need to continue to be responsive to throughout the cycle, but this is a window of time where we do a more intensive dive. Over the past year, we had several reviews that were taking place. Our arts classes, which are represented by our department chairs in the back, and library, were all in mid-review. And so they're here today to really share some of that work with you and to give you a sense of the kind of quality of work that's happening and the shifts that are occurring within our curriculum as a result in this process. So I'm going to start with Nan Stein from Visual Arts.
Good evening. I'd like to just share out that this is the Visual Arts Curriculum Review. We are going to, responsible for visual and media arts, but I'm just going to refer to visual arts this evening. The updates are, we started work in January, and realized that we had standards, our core art standards were relatively new. The old standards were in place for 20 years. And we did work on writing curriculum maps for grades K through 8 and align them to the new standards. We also looked at culturally responsive teaching, 21st century skills, and basically we were working on integrating more curriculum into the visual arts and also having our curriculum be very student-centered. After we worked through, it was very, very time-consuming. We wanted to make sure we had things that links. We wanted to include disciplinary literacy into our maps. And we've had quite a few new members to the department and our seasoned members as well that have been very positive and embracing of this change. So people have been really happy with it. We did concept overviews, essential question pieces, and the curriculum maps, which are living documents, obviously changing. Then the next steps we're approaching are developing the curriculum maps for media arts, which will be 6th through 8th grade, creating units of study for the curriculum maps that plug into the curriculum maps. We want to better align our curriculum with each grade level and building to building and with District 202. Also, more community collaborations. We do a lot as it is in the community as far as shows and things go. We would like to increase that. Increase our content-specific teacher development, professional development, something that's really more relevant to the art teachers or media arts teachers. Also talk about nurturing existing student-teacher social and emotional relationships. Some of our teachers are teaching coding, which has been really positive because they have those existing relationships, and bringing them along has been very lovely to keep people in a building. Further investigate cross-curricular, thematic, and vocabulary connections. We want to increase common vocabulary between the disciplines, and also continuing to increase 21st century skills with students via technology, via problem solving, and via design thinking in the arts.
Thank you. So each of our department chairs will present some of their work, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions at the end. Next, we have Betsy Quinn from Drama.
Thank you for allowing us to be here tonight. And I would also like to personally thank Stacy for all of her support, because every time we asked for something, she was like, sure, we'll make it happen. So thank you. And to my department. We, at the beginning of last school year, as you can see, we surveyed the drama teachers, and 100% of the department wanted to be involved in some way in the curriculum revision, which was so great. So it meant we could take a lot of the Wednesdays and really have in-depth discussions as a department about what's best for our kids. The creative drama, the drama curriculum, we really started a few years ago as the new national standards were created, and then last year when the Illinois standards were adopted, we had 3 members of our team that were working on the national standards, so we were really, really familiar with them, so we were ready to go with that. But how do we take our curriculum that was based on standards from 20 years ago and update it? An equity lens frame all of our discussions, including source material choice as well as best practice. Now, one thing you need to understand is that every part of the drama curriculum has been created by the teachers in the department because there's no textbook. So it's very labor intensive and just a tremendous amount of work. As I said, all the teachers worked, but this summer we had a team of 10 working under the leadership of Jason Ewing, myself, Laurel Sirleth, and Elizabeth Westfall. And our teachers put in over 330 hours last summer on this curriculum project. And so we thank you for that support to be able to do that. Thank you. The drama curriculum, as I said, reflects the new Illinois standards and backwards design. The key components include grade band learning outcomes. We chose grade bands rather than grade specific to give a little bit of flexibility within each school, but in grades 1, 3, 5, and 8, and these are aligned with the Illinois standards as well as the essential questions and enduring understandings from the standards. Again, an emphasis on culturally relevant pedagogy. We revised the current and are beginning to develop new rubrics aligned to the state standards with a particular emphasis on grades K through 3. The reason we're really focused on that is because last time we revised the curriculum, we did not offer kindergarten through 3rd grade drama. So because that's been re-added back into the curriculum, we had to really focus on that. We also created deconstructed lessons, and units. These are very, very detailed examples of how we would plan a lesson in best practice, because many of our drama teachers are trained in theater education, but they are not trained in creative drama, which is our curriculum. Creative drama is an improvisational, process-centered approach to theater, which really does serve all kids. The kids really bring to it themselves. So, but a lot of people aren't trained in this, so we've created some units, 30, 35 pages for maybe a week and a half long unit to really break down why the teacher's making this choice. So as we orient our new staff, they can look at these deconstructed lessons as a sample for their own lesson planning. We also have a chapter entitled Best Practices and Routines in the Drama Classroom. Many of our spaces across the district vary. Some people are in auditorium, some people are in their own classroom, some people go class to class. What are the best practices of how to set up that safe, brave space in the various locations? And we're housing it all in a new Google site that's being developed. So that's the drama curriculum.
And next we have Stephanie Abadaya with general music.
Hello, thank you for your time this evening. So we also were aligning the vocal and general music curriculum to the new core art standards, the national standards, which were adopted in 2014, but had not yet come into our new curriculum. So, upon starting in there, we, as a whole department, instrumental and vocal music, worked together to create a new music department mission statement that I am going to take a moment to read to you. Music education promotes self-expression, creativity, problem-solving, communication, and both independent and collaborative musicianship. As a community of teachers and learners, we strive to make connections between creating music through imitation, exploration, notation, and improvisation, performing music in solo ensemble settings that include playing, singing, improvisation, and movement, responding to music through listening, movement, analysis, and evaluation, and connecting music to its cultural, societal, and historical context and the greater community. And so we took that mission statement as a jumping off point. Where are we going to go from here? And so we went ahead and we utilized a new format for a curriculum that included updates to our scope and sequences, as well as identifying specific benchmark standards and assessments used. And we reviewed and made recommendations for resources that you may hear from me another day about. If you could go to the next slide, please.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And so, sorry.
Sorry, there we go. You're set.
Okay, there we go. All right. So some significant decisions and changes that, that we made to this curriculum revision was including the essential questions and enduring understandings that were not previously presented. As well as determining grade level standards based on time in the classroom. What I mean by that is that these standards, these core art national standards, were written based on the expectations that students would be receiving 90 minutes of general music class time per week. But in District 65, students receive 40 minutes of general music class time per week. Therefore, the District 65 curriculum utilizes the kindergarten through first grade standards for teaching kindergarten through second grade students. Second and third grade standards were utilized for the District 65 third and fifth grade standards. And the District 6th through 8th grade curriculum is based on the 4th through 6th grade core art standards. And then additionally, we integrated the Anchor Standard 4 into our curriculum, which is selecting and analyzing, interpreting artistic work for presentation. Basically what that means is saying we want our students to be able to self-select their music and know how to do that, why they would be picking a particular song for a performance, how they would analyze that piece for their own personal musicianship growth, create a plan of how they would present it, act upon that plan, peer revise, and perform. And so this is a new piece. We've had the piece where, okay, teachers select, and now here we go, let's learn this song. But the fact that the children are starting from the beginning, from the inception of it, to decide what music they're going to perform. This is a brand new piece, and it's what we've been spending actually most of last year's PD on, and are continuing to here in the future to help our teachers be equipped for presenting this to students. And so just so you, and I'm assuming they have access to this. Okay, great. So we have created a Google site for the music department, both instrumental and vocal, that you're welcome to view these curriculum documents as well as the curriculum at a glance and things like that for more information. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next we have instrumental music, Margaret Philbrook.
Good evening. It's lovely to address you again. Ray, thank you, everyone. Instrumental music is pleased to be in full force. Our numbers are up by about 15% this year. So in some of our elementary schools, we're up to 90% enrollment, and some of them are pushing 95%. So it is a very important subject to the people of Evanston, so thank you. So during this summer and for the past year, instrumental music has come together in our department meetings and our PD sessions, working on our curriculum, which, as you've heard, is 20 years old. So we have written and designed and published our new instrumental music curriculum based on the National 2014 Core Arts Standards. The Core Arts Standards on the national basis actually addresses instrumental music as opposed to the Illinois State Standards, which has rolled all the music into one document, which we found was difficult to write on. So we have based all of our understandings on the 3 artistic processes which underlie all of our creative team. Creating, performing, and responding are the backbone for all of the performing arts. The instrumental music faculty has selected method books, vocabulary, software, materials that we've included in our new curriculum. We have not designated specific pieces to be included because music is always evolving and new compositions come available every day. This is helping us stay much more multiculturally connected with our cultural classrooms as they shift and change from month to month sometimes. So music can always be introduced into these, into our curriculum because we have left that certain piece open. Student choice, again, is a very large part of our curriculum that's brand new. The students are choosing music. We are able to go in and have them listen to new pieces, which we have a general teacher over choice for this process, and we'll present 5 pieces that we know are all going to give us what we want out of our curriculum for the children to learn, and then they can choose the one that they truly like to play and to listen to and to sing, and that really means something to them. So that is a wonderful new place in our curriculum. Can we go to the next slide? So our curriculum is divided into levels. We do not teach 4th grade instrumental music, 5th grade, because students can join somewhere in the process. They don't have to enroll in 4th grade, although we find that most of them do, and a very large percentage are staying the full 5 years. We do have students moving in and out of Evanston all the time, so I have a very large 6th grade beginning band that has this year that has never had instrumental music before. So we have to address it by what is your correct year of study. So anyway, so our materials are addressing this. As we implement our new curriculum, We are exploring writing our own method books and pages to help deliver this content more individually for the students, to meet them where they are. Students learn in different ways from each other and from their peers. And so this individual delivery is much more successful. And so in the future, when the window to address our curriculum and revise it opens, we may actually be writing our own materials and that will save immensely on cost of textbooks for the children, and it will also allow us to introduce just more appropriate, at the moment, repertoire for the students. And so I think that concludes instrumental music.
All right, thank you, Margaret. And we have Tracy Hubbard, Department Chair for Library.
Hi. This has been a wonderful opportunity to have the time to update a curriculum. It's been 9 years for us, you can hear that. But particularly in libraries, I can't imagine a space that hasn't changed more and will continue to evolve. A couple of years ago, it was a very common conversation to have somebody say, oh, you know, we've got ebooks and you can go to Google and we don't need that. Well, as we put here, it's dangerous to Google solo. I think we found that deciding between real and fake news lately has become a topic, and it actually is something I can say that to students and they just stop. And what this curriculum did for us is that it moved us to a much more student-centered language. We have always been very proud of our book selection and our literature selection in the district, but we're really looking at what is culturally relevant. Are we truly representing everybody that walks through our doors? Are we representing people that don't walk through our doors? And so that they get a sense of the world. Library standards are essentially fairly simple for finding information, evaluating information, using, and literature appreciation. The standards are based on everybody else's standards. So you hear of Next Gen, you hear of Common Core, you hear of AASL, you hear of technology standards. We use all of those. We added a fifth standard, digital citizenship. Not that we weren't talking about that and working with it, not that there isn't a lot of work to be done around that, but it was there. We're moving from the 21st century, believe it or not, we're now future ready. We've advanced with that, and so talking about that. The libraries is a blend of curriculum. It is also managing a library. So our Danielson is kind of covered under that. We have librarians that work in very different ways depending upon the populations of the schools. So we have what we call a fixed schedule, and we have a fixed flexible schedule, and we have a flexible schedule. So at the middle school, they work as needed and really working on different things. So some of the things that we're really working on into this year is this idea of developing common units, because we have been kind of individual warriors within each building, is to try to develop things that should be common in every building. The unit that we're working on in 5th grade, for instance, is really website evaluation and sourcing. So that would be something. At 3rd and 4th grade, we're really looking at the awards. So Coretta Scott King, Pura Belpre, which is for Hispanic, Coretta Scott King, which is for African American. And how can we teach it in a way that everybody sees themselves reflected? They understand why these books are important, why we need more of these books. We all love Wimpy Kid, but there is beautiful literature out there that we want to share and embrace with every student. And so I'm really lucky to work with the librarians that I do. We are also at the middle school level working on Noodle Tools, which is a tool that they use in high school. So through a relationship that we have, we're kind of going forward and trying to look. And again, that's website evaluation. I could probably talk a long time. So you feel free to stop, talk to any of the librarians, talk to myself. But we're really excited about the work. We treasure working in a community where we have so many community partners, and we have access to 2 brilliant libraries, both Evanston and Skokie, we work with. And we really thank you for this opportunity to update our curriculum, but it's changing by the day. So
before I do open up for questions, I also want to say a very sincere thank you to these 5 department chairs. These 5 department chairs teach full-time and provide incredibly strong leadership for their departments as well as advocacy for their fields and their content. And quite frankly, along the way, they've also educated me a good bit as well. So I appreciate the experience and the opportunity to work with them in this process. So thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you, and again, for your flexibility and rescheduling from last spring to tonight. I'm glad we were able to get you on first. It was a great presentation, and I want to open it up to board members for any questions or comments.
I've got a dabble.
Okay.
First of all, I love the Future Ready because the next time you get to give this presentation, you'll be a quarter of the way through the century. So thank you for acknowledging that. I think it's always interesting when we take the arts and confine you to a formal presentation, right? And nobody gets the summative assessment like an artist because there's always a performance of some kind. So a couple of things both to highlight and state. One is the irony of, for general music, the way you describe the standards, that we're taking the K1 standards and teaching them to K2 kids. And I think it'd be fair to say that you'd be ran out of here if you were talking about math, right? So thank you for being flexible. Thank you for thinking on it. But I think it's good to point out the disparities between content areas sometimes and the way that we have to do things. The arts, general music has it in the mission statement with cultural and societal issues. Instrumental music and creating, performing, and responding using higher level thinking language. In drama, you talked about a safe, brave space. This is supposed to be a space where you push boundaries and you get people thinking and you tell stories and kids can feel connected to stories and make people think, and just keep doing that. Like, don't be afraid of the backlash. So thank you for the work in reviewing it, revising it, and rock on.
Sergio?
Yeah, so, again, thank you for all the work and hours that you put in. I know this, looking at curriculum isn't easy. And again, it's like you're saying, many of you said, again, it was way overdue. And I'm very happy to hear that you're all using a cultural, a relevant lens to look at your work. It's very critical. I think about times where I've seen performances over at my kids' school over at Dawes, and I know Ms. Hawadea did a piece based on a fable from an indigenous culture in Mexico. So I mean, again, that to me is where we're moving, right? And really trying to start to show appreciation for the culture that our families and communities bring into the classroom, right? And us as educators taking advantage, right, of the richness that all of us bring to the educational setting, right? And moving away from that Eurocentric view in how we express ourselves through art and how we teach and all that good stuff, all that stuff. So again, having said that, we do have, we live in one of the most culturally diverse, regions, in the country. I'm wondering, what, and any of you can answer this. Have you reached out to any, cultural organizations like Sones de Mexico in regards to some of the music programming? We have African, music. Cultural music groups, in the area. You can, and also wondering about the relationships that you guys have with, some of our cultural institutions like MCA and the Art Institute and Mexican Fine Art, Mexican National Mexican Museum of Fine Art. I mean, those are really great places to, again, cull some really, really great culturally relevant work that we can expose all our students to.
Did anyone want to?
One of the wonderful
Yeah.
Can you come to the microphone, please?
Each of the arts does have a lot of very significant partnerships. Maybe talk a little bit to your.
Yeah, I think we could all answer for a while on that one, but I know that in music, one of the things is the Evanston In-School Music Association is just a fantastic partnership that we have with them in bringing in so many of the groups that you named have been brought in by ESMO over the years and are continuing to, and they are, and if you're not familiar with the Evanston In-School Music Association, they bring in performing groups from the community that do represent so many of the different cultures that our students come from. And they come to every single school in our district and do performances twice a year. And so the kids get some of those experiences, and it's wonderful because we as music teachers then, if we haven't already made the connections with those ensembles, it's a very easy, they're right there standing next to us, let's, how else can we work together, right? And so, so that's one way, as well as, I'm losing my thought, that we certainly, a lot of those programming groups also working with us in planning different unit designs and things like that, absolutely.
Certainly in literature, and we're actually, I think, getting known that we will really embrace diverse authors. We're very proud of our partnership with the different bookstores. So just recently, the Bookstall offered Jason Reynolds at Haven and Nichols Middle School, which is like an incredible visit. We'll probably be talking to the foundation more about getting more Jason Reynolds, so if there is a partner, we try to find it. Our PTAs are enormously helpful to us, and we're always looking for those different ideas. So have people shoot, we get lots of emails, but we're always looking for opportunities.
Last year, I believe we did some teacher professional development in the Evanston community to make some art teachers more aware of some options they had. We actually started off by heading to Pilsen, and we did go to the National Museum of Mexican Art, which in the fall we were able to catch Dia de los Muertos, the exhibits, and we also were accompanied by Evanston artist Piloto Nieves Ruiz, who is phenomenal. Phenomenal artist, does great residencies. So we did have that experience. We also spent some time in the community at the Art Center. We went to Hack Studios to see what kind of things they could offer with us, partnerships. We did we've done the Ecology Center and some other places in Evanston that we could pull into the arts. There are also a lot of our teachers in the art department do take advantage of free professional development at the MCA and the Art Institute, which are offered outside the school hours. So, but if we're very open to having any, and we're very blessed in this community to have so many parent artists.
Thank you. Just one more, thank you for bringing that up. It's a really important thing, and we are open to that as well, and we do partner a lot. One other thing to add that's a little bit different is we also met with Foundation 65 over the summer to help strengthen many of those partnerships. So I think all of us met, yeah. So.
Wonderful, thank you.
Instrumental music is blessed in this area because of the universities that we have. We have students who bring in their music to our groups with mentoring and tutoring that they do for free with our students, and bring in their culturals and their own specialties that they have. We also have taken kids to Chinatown so that they've been to a Buddhist temple and heard music from the monks. We brought in gamelan groups for them to hear. So there is just, as you pointed out, so rich. There's so much that we can do, and there are so many people who are willing to come to us that the door is always open.
So sorry, I forgot something really important. The Lyric Opera of Chicago comes to Evanston every year, and so our students get the chance to hear real live opera by the Lyric right here at Evanston Township High School. It's a fantastic opportunity for our students, so couldn't leave that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have two questions. So I'm curious how much collaboration happens within the different disciplines. So, combining something that you do with music through the visual arts. I'd be curious. I think, from my experience as a parent, everything kind of just happens on its own through the different segments, but just, I'd be curious what type of collaborations are taking place. And then the other question was, as far as general music, if we're incorporating electronic music into our curriculum.
Sure, I can jump into that one. Absolutely. Electronic music, so a lot of the, in the middle school level, there's a lot of that included, yes. In fact, there's a whole media lab, music lab at Nichols School, which is wonderful that they have there at their fingertips. In K through 5 general music, not as much. But to go with your first question of collaboration, it very much depends on the school community for the teachers there, what level of collaboration they have in the units that we do. It's not so much certainly written into our general music curriculum. However, I can just speak from what I see from my colleagues and myself that we work together as a team, as teams in our buildings, really very well in our schools, and because we want what's best for children, and really that collaboration piece, and knowing that when they can do it here and they can do it here and they can do it here, that it's going to be more meaningful for kids. So there's absolutely collaboration between the arts within the buildings, but it does look different within each building.
I'll respond to that as well. I think most buildings do have fine arts team meetings regularly, so there is quite a bit of collaboration on that respect. I think it's a beautiful year at least for the art department. I'll speak on behalf of my department, and I think other departments as well as people are traveling less, so they are much more available to their homeschool community, which means those collaborations can be way richer, and also the integrations from classroom content can be much richer. I'm at King Arts, so we do that regularly. We meet all the time. We incorporate, we integrate, we collaborate, we all the 8s. And then we also have, I know the students have one-on-one iPads, and the music teacher does do GarageBand composition with them in 7th grade for sure. And quite a bit of music does happen on iPads, composing on iPads that wind up in my media arts room as soundtracks for movies. So it's kind of powerful.
Tag in on the electronic music with instrumental music. It's absolutely integral at the middle school level, grades 6, 7, and 8. We use quite a bit. At my school, we also have the iPads, which there's a lot that goes on with that, but just in our regular performing ensembles. The other, one of the biggest collaborations are the school musicals that happen, especially at the middle school levels. Which is full collaboration between all of the arts groups with the instrumental music, the vocal music, art, drama, and even library actually gets into the act in some of the buildings on the musicals. And then it brings in all of the other teachers from the regular subjects too. So those are very huge collaborations. I also want to mention Project AIM, which is bringing all of the arts into the classrooms, into the social studies rooms especially. Bringing in and combining drama, music, art into the students' work during the day.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Candace? Thank you all. I just wanted to say, today I got to shadow my sophomore, who was taught by several of you in theater and among other classes. And when you made the point about adapting to your space, it made me think when I sat down in that theater, which was just the little theater, and it was an amazing space, what amazing things that you do with different space. And so that brings me to the question just more about articulation. So what role or what involvement did you guys have with your counterparts at the high school as you were working through the curriculum review? And then the second piece of that, and I mentioned this before, was I had an opportunity to do a little focus group because my 12-year-old had a birthday party recently, so there's like 8 kids in a car. I didn't have much else to do with them. So I was asking, I said, we're looking at the arts curriculum again. And they're like, wow, cool, you know, because it's been 9 years. Most of them were hardly alive. But one of the points a couple of the kids kept saying was we'd love to be able to learn more about artists, musicians, and playwrights, and especially relative to the culture, relevant teaching, and so I just raised that up as a suggestion, but the broader point being student input. So how are you guys getting feedback from your students or thoughts from your students on what would make an even more stellar arts programs across the different disciplines?
I think if one of you can kind of give an example of the collaboration with ETHS and kind of run with that question. Part of the design of the review was to connect with ETHS. In each situation we connected with ETHS, that collaboration and connection took different forms with different reviews. Anybody willing to provide an example and talk about student voice?
I will throw in very quickly that in the music department we have regular performances with the District 202 people, and so we're working with each other all the time. They come to our meetings occasionally. We go to their meetings occasionally. Our curriculum was and is supposed to be leading into their curriculum, and so there was dialogue between the two departments on that.
Thanks.
I'm going to ditto what Margaret said in terms of we have a collaborative show with them on a piece of literature, which is a poem that happens every November, 65-202 show. We've now evolved that into, on our input, turning it into more of an open studio. So our elementary students can go through the high school and have hands-on arts experiences. In terms of the curriculum, we are aligning with them as well. We've also had some of our the best input we've gotten is from alumni. The freshmen that come back, pop in. We had a group today that stopped in and sat down and started telling us it's beautiful. So I think that is very valuable input. And we are working on some alignment of some course names because, you know, they think there's no media arts at the high school, which there is. It's just not called that. So we're working on tweaking some things and making the connections stronger.
Thanks. And everybody doesn't have to answer.
That's fair. Yeah, and there are quite a few different examples.
So I just wanted to hear a little bit more, you know, a lot of the in-depth conversation about equity and using an equity lens and culturally relevant teaching is new. Like we're adopting it, but we're also learning as we're building the car. And so I'm just curious for everyone, what were some of the tools that you used to inform the culturally relevant lens or equity lens that you applied to your adaptation or revision of the curriculum, and also if you all had the opportunity to learn from one another in that process, because so many of your colleagues throughout the district and all of us here around the table are all, you know, having these conversations at the same time, and we learn so much from one another.
So one of the tools that we're using very highly, and I would recommend anybody, is to look at We Need Diverse Books. And so it's been basically a grassroots opportunity where it was recognized a couple of years ago that we do not have authors of color, we do not have books of color, we do not, people are not seeing themselves reflected in a book, people are not opening a door and seeing a new culture in the book. It's a problem in the publishing industry. And so they are trying to figure out different ways to encourage the writers and to encourage these, you know, as many people to bring them in. So it's very easy for me to say Jason Reynolds because there's very few like stellar African American, or not as many as we would like, not as many that represent the population. So that's one tool that we use. Another tool is we're looking at some of our programming because we do a lot of programming and we're really just very starting the process, was an equity framework tool.
That's the equity impact tool.
Okay.
Race Forward Equity.
The Race Forward Equity Impact, and specifically we're looking at that in terms of Battle of the Books, is that when we look at the final statistics, there are some people that absolutely have a totally for it on this. And there are some kids in the classroom that we're not representing. When you look at the stage, they're going to look a little bit more like me than anything else. So what can we do to change the program, or not change it, but make a program that challenges all students in ways. So what we're also finding is it's a real long process, because you first have to start with the recognition, and then all of those little things that when you're a person like me that you never have thought about. So, this is the equity work in the district is the start, but it's going to be a long term.
I'll add to that. We also use the Race Forward materials, but in addition, about 2.5 years ago, we had a professional learning community in the drama department that studied Johnny Saldana's book, Drama of Color. It's actually second edition. It's not published yet, but he shared it with us for just our professional development, so we had a lot of difficult conversations about that, and it was very valuable. In addition, we're really talking about not only the material we choose, but how we approach it. One of the things about drama is the kids are their work, right? And so it has to be there. I mean, the children are their work, right? So how do we honor that and what they really bring? With some books, teachers are starting to tell the story rather than show the pictures, so kids can see themselves in the story, no matter what the story is, and those kinds of choices, we're playing with those and seeing what kind of impact that may have on our work. But again, it's always about really evaluating it, thinking it through. Is this really the right decision for all of our kids?
Another question? Yep, I did. And just as I guess from personal experience, I've have young children, and I feel like I have to curate the books that come into our home. And so parents may be a really great resource as well for those parents who are curating culturally relevant options for their home. So I don't think we talk that much about how parents have been involved, but consider those stakeholders, if they haven't been consulted, to continue to bolster content and opportunities. I noticed that there were the Google links that were available, which were wonderful. Are these opportunities being shared also with other colleagues, given that everyone is kind of working on thinking about these same lenses and application to their work?
One area of sharing as part of the process was that each of these groups presented to an advisory group that had representatives from different grade levels, different disciplines. We made sure that special education was involved, second language learners, to really kind of give feedback on perspective. As far as kind of general sharing of this curriculum, probably more school-based or experience-based with teacher to teacher, as opposed to a formal presentation at this point.
Okay. Right. Well, thank you. I really appreciate the depth of commitment that you all made to doing this, and I'm excited for our district. So thank you all and your teams.
Thank you.
Can I make one more comment before you guys leave? Just, I was going to jump in. Little old me. I just want to underscore what Stacy said earlier. I couldn't be more proud of the five of you and what you represent, because if you walk through this district, as I do and as many of us do, you walk into the classrooms, these are fabulous teachers. These are fabulous teachers who are deeply engaged in what they're doing, and they are fabulous teacher leaders. And it's the combination of both that's really great. You're perfecting, you're working on your practice, you're challenging your practice, and then you're leading practices of others. And so I just wanted to say thank you, and I couldn't be more proud of you.
Thank you. Okay, continuing to our next discussion item, the 2017 Strategic Plan Scorecard and Year in Review.
So let me kick this one off, and then my colleagues around the table will join us. And this is just a pleasure to bring forward the work that we do vis-a-vis the strategic plan. I do want to recognize Maria Allison, who is our team champion on this work across all the different areas. Maria is sick this evening and is home, and so unable to introduce the topic. So I'm going to take the take the lead to introduce the topic. Each of my colleagues will talk about the various areas in the strategic plan year in review. It will come back to me to do some introductory comments about our performance review, and then we'll provide data and information on the performance review and then open up for questions. And I'm referring to the little booklet in your package or that you can see that that provides the strategic plan in review. And it really, this report provides highlights of our progress on the strategic plan for the 2016-17 school year, and also summarizes the specific progress that we made in the fourth quarter. And as you know, we come back every quarter with a review of where we're at and where we're going vis-a-vis our strategic plan milestones as our commitment to keeping the strategic plan an alive document that really drives the decision-making and the work that we do in the district. The document that you have is the culmination of our annual planning process. And this process, which board members are included in, includes a review of the prior year's progress and outcomes, a goal setting and work plan development phase, which we work on based on priorities that the district, that you as district leaders have and that we as leadership have. And that feeds into the board planning calendar. As I said, we have ongoing progress monitoring and reporting, and that includes quarterly progress reports, mid-year strategy indicator scorecards, which we present in January, and the end of the year review and the outcomes scorecard, which we're presenting today. This is our way to ensure that our strategic plan just doesn't gather dust for another 5 years, that it's an active, alive document that we are using to drive our work. What you'll hear tonight, as our colleagues go around the table, they will provide highlights of the work that's summarized in the document, and really it's a considerable amount of work that we completed over the last year. This is in addition, as you read through this and as you hear some of the highlights, to the day-to-day operations and management of the district. You can see, as you look at this, what a big lift this is. And while we're serious about our ambitious agenda, this also signals to us that we need to be mindful of how we change a system, how much change a system can take. Part of this continuous assessment and reflection is to hopefully help us strike the balance between ambitious and overwhelming. And we want to be ambitious, and we also want to get things done that are done well. Part of that balance is achieved by focusing. And as you may remember, when we built our work plans for this year, we started with an assessment of which work is most critical to our equity agenda towards improving outcomes for Black and Latinx students. And we prioritized those work streams when building our plans for the upcoming 17-18 school year. And those plans are part of the FYI in the back of the board package. With that as an introduction, I'm going to let everyone spend a few moments highlighting a couple key progress points over the past year, and then we'll turn to a reflection on our outcomes as we discuss the district-wide scorecard. So I'm going to start with high-quality teaching and learning and turn to Stacy and Andali, I believe.
All right, and thank you very much. We are just going to highlight a few pieces tonight, and please, if you have an opportunity to take, look at the strat plan year in review for greater detail on the work. A couple of things that we want to call out, specifically in curriculum and instruction. Last year, we really spent extensive time, energy, and resources on developing high-quality professional learning for our educators and high-quality tools to support the literacy framework and math framework kind of creation and push out within our district. Specifically in literacy, we delivered professional learning to our educators across all the district half-days, instructional coaching, all connected around the same focuses. And so there's a high-quality design for professional learning that really, when we take a look at the kind of literacy summary that's in FYI tonight, indicates that there's some really interesting and positive shifts as a result of that work. So the work that went into that framework and the tools and training is a real highlight for our work this year. This was done while also initiating the curriculum reviews that we just heard about this year and designing essentially new courses for coding, social and emotional learning, and advisory. And so, we're proud of the work that got done in the area of curriculum. In the area of intervention and supports, we clearly rolled out a new online tool for intervention plans, But I think just as importantly, we also added ST Math across all of our schools, which is an important resource to complement our everyday math curriculum to support students who need to be supported at learning either at higher levels or lower levels. And we also specifically redesigned our literacy intervention course in the middle school, creating a better blend of units of study as well as Read 180 supports in order to meet the needs of our learners in that space.
In professional learning, in order to support the K-3 framework implementation, principals participated led by the coaches in site-based professional learning. So principals were in schools doing collaborative visits into classrooms, observing instruction on the ground, and that was the focus of the literacy implementation around professional learning. And that was also supported through our initiation last year of our equity work. We had a full day of professional learning in the fall, and that was preceded by some work at the start of the school year and allowed teachers, all staff, to participate for the first time in really an examination of culturally relevant practices and continue the work. And that became the foundation for what we initiated and continued this year in our work around equity practices in our schools. The Curriculum and Instruction Department also led an initiative in developing innovation grants. This was a highlight that really brought together, invited teachers throughout the district to apply. We had over 20 innovation grants last year. Teachers, this culminated in the end of year innovation fair, and the enthusiasm that came out of that was so successful that this year we've had tremendous enthusiasm and significant number of application increases to do that. So.
And now we'll move on to financial sustainability.
I think last year we recognized that we had some physical challenges, some financial challenges that we had to deal with. And those challenges were built in over time. And as a way of resolving that, the board made a decision to go for a referendum, which passed in April of this year, which we're very thankful to the community about. And as a way to ensure that we continue to provide transparency to the community, we have embarked on a journey of providing as much financial information as possible so that the community recognizes that we take our responsibility as fiduciary of their financial contribution to the district very seriously. And that was in part the reason why we did the 3 budget committee presentation that we provided earlier this month. In addition to that, what we've also focused on is that we've decided that we need to do budgeting differently than what we've done in the past. We need to look at doing budgeting by looking at ways to budget more efficiently. And we are starting that process now for FY19. And one of the key tools that we'll be using will be priority-based budgeting, where we look at programs and see what is successful, and then put more resources on those programs that are successful. And whatever we deem that is not performing to par, we want to shift resources from that and do things just a little differently.
So I'm going to take the lead on the thriving workforce as Beatrice Davis is at a professional conference starting tonight. And in this goal area, we focus on putting systems in place to build the capacity to recruit a more diverse workforce. We improved the teacher evaluation process. We were focused on improving the teacher evaluation process, and we also worked to, and we are working to gather information about staff experience in the district. A couple highlights that Beatrice sent to me. She and Corey Wallace led several professional learning sessions with our principals on equity in hiring practices. This included work on equity-based screening and interview questions, establishing representative interview committees, and removing implicit bias from our hiring process. As a result, we now have a bank of equity-based screening and interview questions, along with what we call listen fors, what we are listening for as somebody is engaged in an interview, to be part of the hiring process. A screening rubric and one chosen or selected equity question were used by principals during our most recent hiring season, and then principals were able to add on to that. And indeed, as we were hiring principals, the team around the table also used equity-based questions to be able, and listen-fors, to be able to dive deep into the experiences that people who are applying to the district and want to work in the district, what their experiences bring. We did survey the employees. We conducted a survey last year that yielded feedback from over 600 respondents. A summary of these data will be shared at the end of October in our next board meeting, and then we'll conduct, we plan to conduct a few employee focus groups to drill down into some of the data to get more voice on that. We will also plan a second survey to be administered in May of 2018 to compare the results as we move forward. And then on the processing side, our rollout of the Talent Ed Perform system, a new system that moves teacher evaluation from a paper process to an electronic process, was successful. The system streamlines the evaluation process and makes sharing feedback and information between the teacher and the evaluator much more efficient. And so those are a few of the highlights that we have on the Thriving Workforce area. Let me turn to family and community engagement.
So let me share 3 highlights from what's happened in this area over the last school year. One is work to build district capacity, district staff capacity for family and community engagement. This happened through a number of different learning forums. We began last year with 2 seed cohorts of 60 individuals across roles in the district, which in this current school year is expanding to 7 different seed cohorts. We began Beyond Diversity training, and we also offered trainings for the PTA Council on family engagement. A second area to highlight is work with community partners to identify and strengthen partnerships that advance equity. Included in this work stream last year as a couple of examples were expanding the community school model to a second school, and also developing a process so that as the district's equity work continues, we begin to build partnership infrastructure, and we are able to designate our resources so that we are focusing on partnerships that advance equity as the primary lever of what we're looking for in good partners. The third area I would highlight is providing resources for parents that are accessible and convenient, and that strengthen communication and collaboration between home and school. And so one example of the work done in this area last year was to provide educational opportunities for parents throughout the year. These included Parents as Educational Partners classes, including one with an ESL focus, a citizenship class, a workshop on using K-12, which is our student information system, so making sure folks could enter the parent portal and get information about their student, as well as computer classes, which we offered in partnership with Evanston Public Library. So those are 3 examples of the work that we were undertaking last year in the family and community engagement area.
And now we want to turn to the safe and supportive school climate area.
Yeah, we did a lot of work. So, we worked on restorative justice in terms of expanding our work to additional schools, but the other thing that we really wanted to do was tighten up our monitoring of that work to see what kinds of needs staff and principals had. So that was a big piece that we worked on this past year. We talked about training opportunities for staff and diversity and bias. We expanded the work of our school climate teams to our second cohort. So our first cohort was working now on safety, and our second cohort is working on relationship development. We improved our kindergarten transition process, so we provided a panel of parents for incoming kindergartners who have IEPs, and so they could learn more about different kindergarten opportunities in our schools. And we created some formal structures to support the district's equity work in terms of developing the equity policy and the framework that we've used in terms of the racial assessment lens. We also pulled together the whole Child Council and the DELT because we felt that was a group that really they feed into each other, and that's common work that we want to use one group to oversee.
So as we continue in the overview of the report, I want to turn to the progress on board goals, and I'm going to offer some framing comments, and then we'll present the data as presented. And as I frame tonight's presentation on performance, I have a few comments, and I want to acknowledge that I'm disappointed with the results of our 2016-2017 district-wide student outcomes on the MAP test. The results are not what we expected due to the momentum that we are building, nor what we recognize to be true of what our children and what our students are really capable of achieving. These results do not reflect the performance improvements we've seen over the last 3 years. I noted these concerns at the opening of school sessions with all of our educators in attendance. I've expressed these concerns in meetings with our building principals. There is an urgency to respond and address these results in our day-to-day work in our classrooms, schools, and district offices so that our intentions are realized in performance improvements for all students. Evanston District 65, Evanston-Skokie District 65 is an outstanding school district. According to Stanford Professor Sean Reardon's data, District 65 students on the whole perform at or above national average, with our high performers scoring at the highest levels nationally. Yet there are gaps, opportunity gaps, that exist and are evident, especially for Black and Latinx students. It is our mission to continue to improve our schools, to improve instruction, and to improve school climate so that our Black and Latinx students and their families find places of learning that motivate and ensure the type of success experienced by many others. In so doing, all of our children in this district will experience even greater growth and learning. Acknowledging and recognizing the urgency by which we must act, here is what we are doing right now. I start with our commitment to children, to the strengths and assets that they bring with them to our schools, to their histories and stories that are part of who they are, to their cultures and languages and backgrounds that make up the fabric of our district of Evanston and Skokie. We celebrate our children and we celebrate our families. The reality is that racial equity and addressing institutional racism, the institutional structures and processes that stand in the way of progress, must and will continue to be our top priority. Every educator and staff member in District 65 knows that we cannot accept the status quo and that in getting to root causes, we must and will focus on racial equity. 2 years ago, we embarked on an equity journey to significantly improve academic outcomes for all children and to examine our biases and name and confront the racialized practices that impact our schools. Our intent is to dismantle systemic and institutional racism through reflection and action on our policies, practices, and procedures, to be proactive in our hiring processes, and to provide opportunities for all staff to examine bias and to think about race in an intentional way. Racial equity must be this district and community's top priority. It's our top priority because we see year after year our academic outcomes for Black and Latinx students fall below what we know they are capable of. Equity is our top priority because these outcomes occur despite the inherent strengths of our students. Equity is our top priority because these outcomes occur despite the resilience and effort of our students. It is our top priority because these outcomes occur despite the talent, commitment, and hard work of our educators. Equity is our top priority because all of our students of every race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual identity, religion, mental and physical ability status, refugee status, and citizenship status, all of our students are negatively affected when we do not identify and collectively resist institutional structures and practices that put some students' needs above others. This commitment demands that we take on an equity lens with our work to improve student performance and progress in the following ways. Our intensive work on K-3 literacy continues, with early signals of success for Black students entering kindergarten who are not literacy ready. We continue to focus on K-3 literacy differentiation and K-1 reading instruction. We are focused on progress monitoring in math and in the early grades, and in expanding our work with ST Math to provide learning opportunities for kids before and after school. We continue to focus on monitoring interventions for students through our multi-tiered systems of support, and through this are committed to having high-quality plans in place for students who have assessment results below the 25th percentile and who do not have an IEP or bilingual plan in place. In our examination of the data, we see a need to focus our intervention work on reading at grades 5 and 6 and math at grades 3 and 6 while attending to all students at all grades. Along with instructional interventions, we are keenly focused on school climate work, emphasizing relationships and safety, and using our equity lens on issues like suspensions and office referrals. All of our principals are creating school work plans that address performance and school climate issues at their schools and are identifying avenues for improvement. We are actively changing our hiring processes and practices, using an equity lens to frame questions for all hires and expanding our hiring pool to include more educators of color. Even with these interventions, we know that we must now double our efforts and get to a greater understanding about root causes. We are proactively doing so in the following ways. We have research data from Sean Reardon that indicates that there are significant gaps in performance as early as 3rd grade, which further indicates that these gaps exist when children land in kindergarten. In this regard, I am convening a group of experts, practitioners, and community members to examine our early childhood programming here at JEH so we can understand our practices, our outcomes, and what changes we may need to make. The task force will have its first meeting in October. I'm also looking for our early childhood provider community and our community partners, including Cradle to Career, to consider how we must all address and improve kindergarten readiness. We can no longer afford to allow our divisions, any divisions across various lines, limit our ability to find solutions. If we want equity to be our top priority, then we must collaborate across our different interest groups to identify new ways to foster excellence and success for all children. We know from research studies that when educators work together and build trust, student performance will improve. In an unprecedented move here at District 65, the administrators, the Teachers Union, the District Educators Council, and the Board of Education have been working since spring to develop the trust and engagement that is necessary to make improvements. In the first 2 weeks of school, Paula Zielinski, who's here this evening, and I visited every classroom in the district together. Our principals and our DEC representatives are coming together next week as a full group to commit to collaborative work. And our board leadership, Suni Karta and Anya Tanivuti, are engaged with union leadership and our district leadership team on how we problem solve together. We are deeply engaged, as we mentioned earlier, in racial equity professional development. To this end, we must all confront the ways that racism impacts our work, becomes coded in racialized language, and ultimately gives license to overlook the real demands that our students require. To this end, we have over 200 colleagues signed up for the important work of engaging in courageous conversations through Beyond Diversity training and collaborating 6 days a week in teams on Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity, or SEED. This SEED training includes teachers, administrative assistants, custodians, social workers, community members, parents, principals, senior administrators, the board, and me. Several of us have signed up for SEED training that starts now. We are working with Dispatch to address the performance levels of our students through curricular interventions, progress monitoring, school goal setting, collaborative work with our educators, and our commitment to equity and to changing practices and structures that create barriers for students to achieve. We also know that our community plays a very important role to support students during our out-of-school time with mentors, activities, and other opportunities. We must work on these issues together and with a commitment to not stop until we see significant improvements. And with that, I'm going to ask Peter to present the data that is on performance that's in the small booklet that we presented and in the board report that's in the package.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to walk through in just a minute the data for the 4 goals that the board set at the time of the adoption of the strategic plan. But before I do so, I want to reintroduce the guide that we created last year for interpreting data through an equity lens, just because data has often been used not only in this district but in education generally as a tool to perpetuate inequities rather than to advance equity. So I want to remind us about 4 things. First, data in education has historically been used to perpetuate inequality and to justify outcomes that should not be acceptable in a system committed to equity. This reality is present even as District 65 seeks to use data to inform equitable decision-making. Second, when aggregate data show that members of a particular student demographic group score below benchmarks, these outcomes reflect significant challenges faced by education and social systems that are intended to give every student the opportunity to succeed. These results reflect opportunity gaps faced by marginalized groups due to institutional racism, and for many families, the lack of social and economic supports, and should not be used to draw conclusions about the efforts or abilities of these students or their families. Third, when aggregate data show that groups in District 65 are outperforming state or national averages, or that score gaps in our district are similar to those at the state and national levels, these results do not mean that the district can have any less urgency in efforts to promote equity. And last, scores on measures of academic progress, or MAP exams, which is primarily what we're going to look at tonight, while important, should not be used to draw conclusions on whole student success. So with that, let me turn to the data and to highlight, just as we start, that the data that we're going to look at tonight come from the MAP exams, which assess students in the subjects of mathematics and reading. And the data that we're going to be looking at are from the administration of this test last spring in the April-May time window. So first I want to look at students who are meeting college readiness benchmarks. These performance levels are well above the national average, and they represent a likelihood of moving on to high school and then ultimately scoring on the ACT at a level that would allow the student to enroll in college. What we saw last year in reading was a dip of 1.5 percentage points, and in math, a small uptick of about 0.3 percentage points. In both cases, we need to accelerate growth compared to previous years in order to be on track for the target at the end of the 5 years of the strategic plan. The second goal the board adopted at the time of the strategic plan was to increase the percentage of students who are making expected gains. This is a metric that we had made significant progress on in the 2 years prior to this most recent year. And in both subjects in this most recent year, we saw a dip of several percentage points in both subjects. The third goal that the board adopted at the time of the strategic plan adoption had to do with the percentage of students who were scoring in the bottom quartile. As with the expected gains statistic that we looked at just a minute ago, this is an area where the district had made very significant progress in the previous 2 years. And then in this most recent year, we saw an uptick of approximately 3 percentage points in both subjects. That having been said, it is important to note that the national average for this statistic would be 25% of students scoring below the 25th percentile. And then the fourth goal that the board adopted at the time of the strategic plan was to decrease opportunity gaps. And the measure of the outcome of this would be the percentage of students of various demographic groups who were scoring at or above the college readiness benchmark. Taking reading first, there were 3 student demographic groups that had small increases in the percent of students who were meeting college readiness benchmarks last school year. Those were Asian students, multiracial students, and students who had IEPs. All other student demographic groups reported on the scorecard had decreased performance from the previous year on the reading metric. The scores of Black or African American students, Hispanic or Latinx students, and students eligible for free or reduced price lunches were the ones who decreased the most from the previous year. In mathematics, the percent of students who reached college readiness benchmarks in math increased for multiracial students, for students with IEPs, and for white students. All other student demographic groups reported on the scorecard had decreased performance from the previous year. The scores of students who qualify for a free or reduced price lunch and African American or Black students were the ones that decreased the most from the previous year. I won't spend much time on this slide. Suffice it to say that in the report, we have also included percentile and growth percentile scores so that you can contextualize the information that I provided in terms of national averages. The primary takeaway from this slide is that when we talk about the average percentile for a student in District 65 in both reading and in math for both 2016 and 2017, at most grade levels, students are scoring well above the 80th percentile. When we look at growth percentile, you can see here the result of the dip in the percent of students who are making expected gains. In that, in the previous year, 2016, in almost all grade levels and in both subjects, there were very high average growth percentiles in the 80th percentile and above. In several grade levels as high as the 97th percentile of national growth. Whereas in this most recent year, the average growth percentile for students in reading varied between 22 and 56 percentiles by grade level, and in math they varied between the 2nd and the 69th percentiles. So you can see it's a pretty dramatic change in terms of the growth percentile from one year to the next, whereas a smaller difference in the average performance percentile from one year to the next. So let me turn it over to Stacy.
District 65 leadership at the district and school levels, in addition to school instructional teams, spent extensive time reviewing, analyzing, and learning from our 2016-17 MAP results. The memo we present in tonight's packet includes some of the shared learnings and commitments from these meetings, collaborations, and work. Several key areas of work that rose to the top of this analysis include, first, maintaining and refining our K-3 literacy work with a specific lens focused on early literacy achievement for Black and Hispanic students. The K-3 literacy report that's included in tonight's packet highlights some early progress, most specifically in our kindergarten and first grade, where we see advancement in the achievement of our Black students and students who do not assess as literacy kindergarten ready when they enter District 65. This information indicates to us that the foundational work that we began this past year in K-3 is beginning to bear fruit, and that we need to continue to hold that focus and refine it to improve the work that we're doing in those spaces. One thing that was called out within the memo is that we are very aware of a significant achievement gap when students hit MAP in 3rd grade. And so this work really is foundational to us addressing that gap and some of those concerns prior to arriving in 3rd grade. Second, in math, we really are targeting areas where specific challenges have been identified, including 6th grade, where we see that for the past 2 years, we really have had a much lower percentage of students making expected gains. So really digging in and learning, getting a better understanding of the root causes for that dip, and looking both at the 5th and 6th to understand the nature of that particular issue. Additionally, we'll continue to focus on K-3 differentiation in our elementary schools for math, while maintaining a focus on algebra implementation, as we've made a deep commitment to ensure the success for algebra this year. We are also advancing our work to strengthen the intervention processes, plans, and options available to meet the needs of our striving learners. As we see in the data, we see an increase in the percentage of students in the bottom quartile. Our intervention work is specifically designed to identify those students, define plans, and monitor the progress of those plans, with the goal of accelerating their learning and moving them closer to grade level or at grade level and beyond to ensure success in our district. So we're committed to improving our intervention tool and supporting school-based intervention processes, leading to more impactful plans for our learners.
And this work has to fall into a particular context. And we are really arguing as a district that this includes really thinking the way we're thinking and feeling and understanding our work in equity. The role that the individual plays in looking at interventions, looking at lifting new curricula, is really impacted by the beliefs within. And so the equity agenda is really set up to help the individual teacher, staff member, custodial, paraprofessional, everybody in the building to think about the role that racism and inequity plays and really think about both structural but also personal impact. Neglect in itself can be a form of racism when we don't recognize the urgency required to change. And so we really feel that the role that the professional learning that's happening this year, that's been enacted throughout the year, both in our school climate work and through the Beyond Diversity and SEE training, will be part of this real shift in mindset that makes intervention, the K-3 literacy framework, have a new level of efficacy and importance. Our school improvement planning work. Our school improvement planning work has also gone through some changes. We have a school improvement working group that's been collaborating between district staff and principals that's examined the process and finding ways to become much more, I would just, granular and specific about the kinds of interventions that an individual school needs. And so we have a whole team of teachers that rally around principals in developing school improvement work plans to then execute those in support of the school instructional teams that are now being lifted. So school instructional teams have now a much more laser-like support of some district resources, and that's been a benefit to many of the schools. And that's changed. We're looking to see how this will change our school improvement planning process. This is a thing that we are not lifting, and the results are coming in soon, where we'll be looking to see how plans have changed this year and adjust our process as needed. In hiring practices, as you've heard, we've made some real concerted effort through the leadership team at the district level and in collaboration with the principal and our equity consultant to think about the types of questions that are being asked, the process itself, and to make sure that those who we are, both those of us in recruitment are thinking about who's being invited, but also in thinking about the kinds of new candidates who are coming through the door and their orientation towards equity and thinking about who's in front of us and them being almost indoctrinated from the get-go in the practices and priorities of our district and being aware of that.
Our school climate work has resulted in, we now have all of our sites trained in terms of school climate. All schools are working on either relationships, which could be an effort that they make with restorative justice, for instance, or like concentrating on their relationships with students, with fellow staff, or they're in the safety phase, which is looking at discipline and how safety, both emotional safety and physical safety, happens within our school setting. And we have, actually, our first cohort is having an updated training on that tomorrow. And the other thing that we're also doing is really looking at decreasing our rates of absenteeism. A few years ago, we were able to get a grant through the state where we hired a student engagement facilitator who has done a lot of work in really helping us develop a much more uniform system of addressing our absences that are either happen through truancy or school avoidance or a disconnect with coming to school. So that's been a piece that we're really excited about, that this is really functioning in a much more uniform way.
So really, in conclusion, as we present the entire package of the year in review, we hope you see that we take very seriously the priorities set at this table and set as senior administrators of the district to drive the strategic plan and everything we do, and to actually report back on it, and report back on it in an honest and transparent way. We don't shy away from the data. We don't shy away from when we're bumping along and we need to actually readjust, and we don't shy away from the performance data at all. These are conversations that not only are happening here, but have happened before all of our educators, with our principals as they're setting goals, as we set goals as well. And so as we look to the future, we are driven by the urgency that these data speak to us, and speak to us in terms of the work that we have to do. And I think there's a key piece that Stacy pointed to. We're seeing some results in the early grades, and those are the things that we want to capitalize on to drive what we have to drive in terms of instructional improvement, in terms of performance improvement, and really in terms of the overall engagement of our children who come to us with such fantastic assets, and our job is to grow those children in every which way we can. So with that, we open it up for questions, comments, concerns.
So do we have comments or questions? Joey, do you want to start?
I have one question, and I have to acknowledge that it's a complex web, so while the question is acute, it's tethered to a few other things. So I'll first start by acknowledging that the best classroom management plan is an engaging classroom, right? Under safe and supportive school climate, Joyce, restorative justice practices and working with people on it. Specifically, are our school resource officers involved in that engagement with teachers, because they're an integral part of some of our schools, and how we respond to students when they're in escalated states? I'm specifically asking because we know that when our students have a negative interaction with police, oftentimes we lose them for much longer than just that moment, for every moment beyond, and the school becomes an unsafe place for them or a negative environment for them. And I'm curious to know if the Beyond Diversity, the SEED training, and specifically the school-based restorative justice practice conversations include the team members who maybe aren't necessarily D65 employees, but rather are SROs.
Well, it's interesting that you brought this up. This is something that Andalib and I are working on this year, is in terms of addressing some of our disciplinary issues, is to look at this within the context of restorative conferencing. So we really are interested in this being a situation where we talk through what the issues are. We have in the past, however, used the Evanston Police Department to provide some of that restorative conferencing for some of our families to great success. So that's something that we want to replicate within our schools in terms of some of our issues, but I think that EPD will still support us in situations that sometimes need to be addressed outside the school setting. So, but within the classrooms, no, we are not using our resource officers in that way, but we do want to have some kind of impact or work with them to connect in a different way so that we can improve the disciplinary.
And our two school resource officers, actually Officer Wright has moved on to a new assignment, but Officer Wright and Officer Hunt are they have a regular presence in our schools. So they have relationships with the kids. And so that's actually a really important thing as a starting point. We've had an opportunity once to talk about some of the issues that are ever present in society right now on the interaction of police and children, police and adults, police and people of color. And so we've had that conversation, and Andalip and I have just set up with Raphael as well, a meeting with the police chief and some of the top deputies. And so we can bring this up as well in terms of how we actually think about the relationship that we have with Evanston Police and how we can actually nurture that in the way that you're suggesting.
Yeah, I just think as the whole restorative nature is about breaking down barriers and opening up pathways for kids and creating safe spaces in the buildings. And if the school can be safe and supportive, and then you have this person who's not a school staff member but is a staff member, who maybe has relationships but doesn't have that, the ability to engage in a conversation around race, the ability to engage in a conversation in a middle school around the ways students of color interact with police in our community. I mean, talk about a topic over the past month. We really need to make sure our SROs are engaged in the conversations both with staff, because it takes practice, but also up to the task of having those conversations with our kids so they can show from their end that it's not just a one-way thing where we want kids to trust them because we've asked them to come into the school, but that we're willing to go, it's a two-way street there, right? Yeah. I just wanted to, I think it's important for them to be a part of this broader conversation if they're going to be a consistent presence in our schools.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Just to be explicit, Joy's question prompted this thought, which is, do the SROs go through, or are they required to do any of the trainings that we offer in the district? Beyond Diversity, SEED, restorative justice practices, because it's pretty difficult to integrate.
They've
into a
had
culture of
training
work
through
without it.
Gila Logan, I believe, at EPD, and that's where their training was, but they have not been with us in our Beyond Diversity sessions, although we could certainly invite them to be a part of that. Yeah.
The restorative justice practices also, the police department has a very strong process internally. While it doesn't speak specifically to the issues of race, and our SROs being trained to that, and I think that's a great suggestion that we will definitely acknowledge and work on. I am in regular contact with them, so I will definitely carry that and work with Peter to think about the timing and best way to get their involvement.
Yeah, the EPD social work department really did bring us the restorative program that we have. They were a collaborator with us and worked on the training, and we really owe them a thanks for what they did.
Oh, and they have great resources, but when the leadership meets between, us and them, at the end of the day, they're police officers, and they're trained to respond to certain things a certain way, and sometimes things happen in a school that a police officer will respond differently than an educator. And if a police officer is on site, they might respond to something that maybe an educator could respond to and not break the seal of trust. I just want to make sure that we know where those lines are, and we know when we're calling on them that's for reasons that are beyond our ability to handle.
That also implies an important relationship between the administrators at the school and the SROs, and important dialogue, so that if there's an incident that, we're absolutely committed to safety, but if there's an incident, that the educator's perspective can be considered along with the police perspective, and if we can use the wild card of the educator's perspective, as long as we're preserving safety, that's the way to go.
Right. But again, statistics. Once you bring an officer involved and you put them in a room with a student of color and their parents not there, even if an educator's there, whether they leave that meeting 5 minutes later and it's a good conversation, you still may have lost that student for far longer than that moment. And I think it's a really important conversation to have face to face, and for us to get an update on, like, where do we draw those lines, and our educators up to the task of being able to tell an officer in an escalated state with a student, I don't actually need you now, the student needs me now instead of you. And the restorative practices is de-escalation. It's building bridges, it's conversation, and that comes from the team that's going to be there every day, not the person who kind of floats through the buildings. And does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I just want to make sure that it's a more cognizant conversation around those topics than, and they have great resources. I love it, but they're still police officers and I respect them. But once we burn a bridge with a kid, if it happens in 3rd grade, that's a long time.
Yep. Yep. I appreciate that.
So I think we're all saddened by these results, especially when we're seeing a positive trajectory. And thank you, Paul, for talking about our ongoing commitment and our long-term commitment. And these are long-term commitments that we make around the equity work and the instruction work. And so, but I am curious if we have any other point of view of why such a precipitous dip in this 1 year. Like, because it seems, especially the portion around the students' increase in the number of percentile and the 20th percentile and below, it feels like there has to be some other context. And when you drill down and look at 3rd and 6th grade and then some 7th and 8th, I'm wondering, is there anything particularly when we approach things with an equity lens that we think may be going on in those particular grades? Because the systemic bias that we're addressing has been in place over the long haul, right? And that's what it didn't just happen in 1 year. So it wouldn't explain, a precipitous change in 1 year. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be working on it, but I'm just trying to grapple with what other factors, maybe you guys, as you've studied it closely, think could be lending to a precipitous backward trend in that 1 year. Not to diminish the longer term work, but just because I know you've drilled down into the grade levels and such, so.
So I think I'm going to kind of respond to your question in 2 different ways. First, kind of the overall question about why kind of a pretty significant shift within the last year. And one of the places we started with overall curriculum and instruction was to step back and say, okay, what shifts have we made within curriculum and instruction that may have triggered this kind of slip in making expected gains or anything along those lines? And the reality is the shifts that we made in curriculum last year were all in kindergarten through third grade. So for the vast majority, for all but reading in third grade, we were implementing the same curriculum. We always make some revisions along the way. I think, frankly, we've strengthened the texts that we offer through English Language Arts in the middle school. I think we're strengthening some of the work that we're doing in 4-5. And so that first filter of have we made shifts in curriculum that may have netted out some of these results really didn't test very positive for us. Certainly in third grade, we're looking at the work we did. We knew that the reading workshop adoption was a 2-year adoption. This past year, we were very focused on how to get that core mini lesson instruction in place. This year, we're focused on the full reading workshop, which puts much more emphasis on the delivery of the lesson and then the teacher's follow-up moves after that in regards to differentiation, conferring, small group work, which really creates those connected small group learning experiences to support learners at different levels. So that is the focus of our work this year in third grade, and I think those two pieces coming together will create a very strong core for reading instruction in second and third grade. When I think about, you mentioned the percent of, actually, as you were talking, I'm not sure now if you mentioned it, but the percent of students in the bottom quartile. One of the things, last year we picked up a new tool, the MTSS Explorer, and we moved to creating plans online. There was a significant lift to implementing that tool. Mm-hmm. It took time to train educators. It took time to support educators in using that tool. One of the things that did happen as a result of that work is our processes around intervention plans in schools were not as tight as they had been in previous years because our eyes went to using the tool, building the tool out, building those practices. So I do think that some of our work around the actual intervention meetings and processes in schools last year were not as strong and consistent because we pulled energy away from that to move plans to an online system. Yep. In the long run, we think that's a better system because we want to know about school kids' plans year after year, regardless of whether they're moving in and out of district or across schools. That's why this year as we came back in, we did a lot of work over the summer to strengthen the tool with the vendor, as well as rework some of the processes. And we've actually been spent time with the principals already on 2 different occasions on how we want to shift processes at the school level this year and strengthen them to ensure that we, one, are getting we are using the tool and using the tool well, but most importantly, we're having meaningful conversations in our MTSS processes at the schools. And so in that space, I do think that when we've peeled back the layers for students in the bottom quartile, I think it's to strengthen those processes in our schools with the support of the district, shifting back from a new tool to a full comprehensive process.
So I thank you for that. And I think I would add to that just that I'm concerned about fatigue and then the resources that we need to deliver on those plans, right, by supporting our educators and our teachers. I know we talked in the materials about supports, but how are we going to do that, right? Because it's still primarily the teacher's responsibility to do the interventions, and while they may be getting coaching or support or whatever, it's the teacher, the one teacher predominantly in that classroom with that responsibility and with, increasing numbers now, obviously, of students that are going to need to apply it. So I think we really need to think long and hard about how are we resourcing that model. I totally get that makes practical sense that we have to get tools implemented, and that could take us off the game. But even now, I'm concerned that we aren't set up for success because we don't have enough supports for the teacher, and that's going to lead to fatigue and other concerns at the classroom. And so I hope we would take that into consideration and kind of talk with our teachers about how are they able to implement these plans, and do they have literally the time, resources to do that? I was trying to triangulate, and because we have so much data in the FYI, the other thing with the 5 essentials data, just looking there, we've had a pretty precipitous drop in safety, or the perception of safety. And so I wonder how that is playing into, either whoever filled, either students, teachers, everybody's perception of safety and their level of safety in their environment is going to translate into how they perform. So that was a significant drop in 1 year. So I just think we got to keep thinking about, there's the long-term game, but there has to have been some things that are rejiggered. And on the positive side, as you've alluded to, and I think thank you to Opal for asking for this data, and I hope we get to talk about it another time, maybe in more depth. But looking at the DRA data for Black students and seeing that those that were kindergarten ready and for the last several years went from 61% to 76% of the current, the last year's kindergartners by the end of the year. That is really a positive thing, and we have to continue that trajectory. And the same thing for those who were not kindergarten ready, went from 52% to 69%. Those are pretty significant increases. And so hats off to you all for the lots of work and the teams and the educators who have done that work. And I think we can drill in there and see some of the schools that are doing amazingly well. So net, this is sad information, and I just feel like we've got to keep attacking at what those causal items are and looking at the long-term trajectory. So thank you.
There are places where we're building infrastructure to address some of these issues, and we have to be cognizant of the issue of fatigue and resources. But if we think about safety, we think about the restorative justice work, and then we think about the school climate work, and that's where we, school by school, are building opportunities to really address these concerns. Our teachers, and it's fantastic that we have the extra planning time. We have extra planning time, and as the principals and the school improvement teams are actually working on new school work plans and working on setting goals, there's now extra time to be able to do the type of planning that's necessary given the data that we have. And that goes back to full circle to the data. We can dig down into some of these data and see where we're making progress and see where we're not making progress, and try to make those adjustments as well. But your premise is a good one, which is we are all working very hard on multiple things, and we want to make sure that we have the best focus so that we can provide the resources so we can do the work that parallels the excitement of our arts educators who came tonight. And we want to have that in every classroom across the district, and that's what we're working on.
Thank you. I challenge the use of the word extra in plan time. There is no extra planning time for a teacher.
Well,
right. They never have enough plan time.
Well, we have planning time. I stand corrected.
More than we had.
More than before.
Different.
So I have a couple of comments. Again, thank you for all the incredible work that you guys do, and we're year 2 into at least doing some of this equity work. And I was at a presentation, I was doing a presentation around best practices for early childhood dual language learners, and there was a superintendent out of West Chicago who talks about, again, having implemented, just a big, big program, right? And he talked about the J curve, right? So there's a J curve that happens. So you'll see an upward trend, but when you implement something, then you have a J curve, right? And then it starts going up. So I don't know, Peter, if you're familiar with that as a data person, but I think that when we talk about initiatives in schools, when you're embarking on new work, you're going to see a dip, and that's going to upset people. But then then we trend up again, right? So in saying that, I mean, again, I have a lot of hope, because when I take it all into context, right? When I take the equity work and how we talk about, engaging families and participating, in parents as educational partners, really trying to pay attention to building relationships with the communities, as opposed to kind of just strictly focusing on academic and data, which I think has and I really appreciate you, having this statement that talks about interpreting data through an equity lens, right? That we know that data has historically been used to perpetuate inequality. And that to me is we know that the history of standardized testing, that it again, it is slanted, that it really doesn't measure the whole child, and we know that children are more than test scores, right? That a children is more than MAP, right? Unfortunately, we've had education law at the federal level that has really, pushed education and educators in school districts to really push for a certain number, right? We want 98% of kids be reading at grade level by third grade, right? But not taking into account how children develop differently, and also how children have an opportunity, an access gap. Right, so we know that kids who have better resources, who have families who have economic resources, are able to put their kids into tutoring, private tutoring, or extracurricular activities, and travel to different places, and then that in turn impacts the way they academically perform on these tests. And there's others who don't, and that impacts how they test. Right, so we have to be very clear in regards to. Again, how data plays into the equity work, how it perpetuates some of it, and maybe as a board really start discussing finding different ways to measure outcomes and access to opportunity, right? And for me, that's again, it's the small things like, so how many Black and Latinx kids are getting access to tutoring, right, within a school, or maybe getting a scholarship to get private tutoring after school. Or how many kids are getting enrichment activities during the summer, right, who are Black and Latinx. So because to me, that is what's going to make the difference, and the end result is that you'll see an increase in academic achievement, is when we take care, when we look at the social emotional development of children and their families, and having them included having families included as partners, and acknowledging that they're the first teachers, and weaning their knowledge from home to let us understand their children and how we should be teaching them. I think that's when we can close this opportunity gap, right? And I think we really need to move beyond just looking at the MAP score, and we don't even use PARCC. PARCC is useless. But again, looking at ways of measuring different outcomes that take into account the social emotional development of children, how we engage families in the educational process, all families, not just the ones who come out, they're active because they have the time to do that. And I think we can get to a better way or measure in how children are actually succeeding or not succeeding in this school district.
Thank you.
Yep, I had some comments that are related. So I really appreciate the initial introduction to our discussion of this data, and approaching it through an equity lens. I think that we're making really important progress together in how we think about equity and how we talk about it. There's still so much to do, and I think part of that is how we think about broader measurements of student success, because it lends itself to how we describe student success. So how do we get to the practicalities of what we know academically? We know that historically standardized tests are not just a measure of intelligence, but they're it's a cultural lens, right? So if standardized tests were through a different cultural lens, they might ask, what's the average cost of an elotes, right? A lot of students might have a difficult time answering that question unless they had a cultural lens that allowed them access to elotes and if they had ever bought it on the street. Well, we ask students those types of questions on our assessment tools. We asked that I had first graders that I was teaching in an urban setting, and they were asked to find the picture of a bridle. Well, most of them had never been to a horse farm. So while they had the ability to distinguish differences in pictures, that was just something that they had no cultural access to. But then we would determine that those students somehow did not have the ability. So I think that, having the practical understanding, I think that we have the practical understanding that these assessment tools are in some ways, well, we know, were established as tools of stratification. And they have a heavy cultural lens layered on top of how we analyze intelligence. And those two things are different. But then we find ourselves making statements like, you know, X amount of students are not, black students are not kindergarten ready, right? Well, those students may not be kindergarten ready through a certain lens, and it's appropriate for us to find ways to build more access for those students to perform on those assessment tools. But if we also had broader measures, we might also say, while some students are not kindergarten ready in this aspect, they are kindergarten ready in their level of resilience or their pro-social behaviors or readiness to engage and contribute to a community, right? And we don't have any way of describing that. And so I really challenge us, like those are the equity access points. Those are the actual institutional barriers that perpetuate institutional racism and exclusion and stratification. So if we don't push on what have been the mainstays for how we evaluate what is success, there may not be tools readily accessible. It may really challenge us. However, if we don't question the conventions of how education has been evaluated historically, then we will continue to describe students in a deficit manner. And I think that that's one that is hurtful to students, right? Students need to hear about the assets and the strengths that they bring to the classroom, and they need to hear more than, I believe in you. I had lots of teachers that told me that they believed in me, but I knew they didn't. And so we can say as an institution as much as we want that we believe, but we have to also have these measures to communicate to children and families that we see you and we can describe it to you in a formal way, just as formally as we describe to you your performance on the established assessment tools. So it's a big lift. It's not something that we're going to do tomorrow. It's not going to be something that we do really in 1 year, but I think continuing to push ourselves to think about how we measure more broadly what students bring and how we describe it at a high level, but also how we describe it at an interpersonal level is something that we should continue pushing ourselves to do if we really want to make headway on this equity lens that we want to view this data through. And I think I just want to also applaud a success that I think that we made is talking about, when we talk about our performance in TWE programs, we talk about children being biliterate, as opposed to just talking about how children have performed on English assessments. We are talking about how students have performed on English and Spanish assessments and showing that children do know the word, but it needs to be in a culturally relevant access point, which is language. In that instance. So I think that continuing to push ourselves to do those things is important. I really appreciated hearing what were some of the projected causes. It was a similar question that I had for the precipitous drop. I'm also curious how we came to some of those conclusions. I think we've been making a lot of progress in pulling in stakeholder voice, and we're continuing to grow there, but I'd love to hear more about how people were engaged, teachers, parents, children, to come to some of those conclusions about what may have been the causes.
So the work that we did primarily over the summer to look at MAP results was really focused on engagement with school leaders, with school team members at the school instructional team level, so educators and school leadership. And the vast majority of this work did occur over the summer months. So the point is noted. We did not necessarily, from the district level, I'm not comfortable speaking for the schools on this one, but from the district level, the analysis that we ran was very much inclusive of district and school leadership, but we did not include parents or students in that part of our analysis. Yeah. From that direct point of view, we have looked at 5Es, we've looked at other places where parent and student voice is captured, but not in a kind of live dialogue or discourse.
So I wonder if over the course of the year, as we continue to think about what was the cause and how we can be responsive, are there ways to capture additional voices to kind of affirm or confirm or not, or add to the conversation? I also just want to acknowledge that this was difficult information to consume, but it's also, you know, looking a year back, right? And so the goal is to learn, and I think that it feels like we have been doing some learning and some growth, and I wanted to acknowledge that. As a board, we've been talking a good deal about less is more, but I think also working in relationship with administration, and hopefully that trickles down, continuing to have conversations with multiple stakeholders in the room, having conversations about how less is more and how do we negotiate what is all really important work, but also considering what is actually feasible and how do we do it well, as opposed to having a huge quantity. And so I hope you all feel supported in that, but I think that that is a commitment as a collective. We certainly have seen more opportunities for community to be engaged. Thank you so much to Opal for the pushes, and I applaud also administration for coming together and providing that information publicly. It's been very useful information to review, and I think will continue to propel additional conversations and questions. The TWE expansion discussions, I found it really useful, and I think that we can always do more to continue to bring people out, but it felt like really good turnout, and I saw lots of different perspectives in the room, and we were all discussing, and that was really helpful. And hopefully it feels helpful to you as well. And I think the algebra conversations, the budget conversations, it's a huge lift, and so I appreciate the work that's going into it, but I also hope that it continues to inform our ability to do, to create an environment where we're responding to this data with everyone's input. And I think also, you know, the work that, that Paul, you started with, going to turn with Paula, who isn't here anymore, but that work, starting that work, with Deb and Paula, your leadership and commitment to doing that work, and then Suni and I also initiating the convergence of all of us to have board, DEC, and administration in the room at the same time. I think that it's been a really powerful opportunity to work through things together and build trust while doing that, regardless of agreeing. And hopefully that creates an environment also that responds to making teachers feel more supported and more heard all the way at the board level. And I think that we have a good deal of work to do to respond, but hopefully it feels like we're responding together. And hopefully that makes a difference.
Just a comment or two. Thank you for the range of comments. I appreciate that you recognize the preamble that Peter discussed in looking at data, and really the stake in the ground that we will put deep and hold on to is about children and their assets and how we move forward, not deficits. And I think it's a really important piece. As we think about broader measures, and we think about the broader measures that can tell the story about a young person, and you're not saying this, but I just want to say it's not an either or, it's an and we all know there's an obvious piece here. We know that we have to teach young children how to read so they can read to learn. And there's a pivot point, typically, if you look at the data nationally, around third grade. And it's a pivot point where the young striving reader becomes a reader, and the reader can then be accomplished both in the academic sphere as well as in all the social interactions that they have, and they find success. And again, it's not what you didn't say this, but I think it's just important to stress again that even with critique of standardized tests, the MAP scores give us some dipstick into where our children are on literacy, on reading, and on mathematical literacy that can help drive that agenda. And I don't want to shy away from those data while we explore the other data. And And I think it's a really important tension. We can be absolutely critical of the biases of standardized tests, but if we know at a second, third, fourth grade level that a young person is really struggling in reading, we have to do something about it. And that's at my core. I think it's at our core as educators, and it will support, I think, everything that you just said as well.
I don't think I have a lot to add to what everyone said. Just a couple of really quick points, again, going back to the idea of looking at maybe what happened over the past year to cause this dip, recognizing that a one-year dip is not a trend. But going to the 5 essentials and the safety issue, I at some point, I don't know if we're planning on tying the data to like ODR data, and was there a significant increase in referrals amongst particular groups? If kids are being pulled out of the classroom more often, then it would not be far of a stretch to say that learning is not going to be happening. So I'd be interested to know if there are any correlations there. And then also, I think it's hard to separate what is going on in the world and in the country that will affect students' perception of safety in institutions. Certainly there's research that's reflecting that it's affecting adult anxiety levels, so I think it's not a stretch to say that it would also be affecting student anxiety levels. Obviously, we can't control what's happening nationally, but we can control our responses to it. So I think that, going back to Anya's point of maybe talking to students and families and teachers and trying to understand maybe how some of those forces are at play, so that we then can know how to properly, deploy teachers, social workers, however, to respond to some of those concerns might be a useful thing to pursue.
I just wanted to add one additional thing. I absolutely agree with you that there's this is about and broader, not less or shifting a lens, and not to say that I have this down for myself, but I really challenge us to think about not using MAP, but how do we describe performance on MAP, right? Do we describe it as a student responsibility? You have not met your benchmark, right? Or is it we have not met a benchmark, or we have more work to do, or we want to think about how we need different supports in order to achieve a particular standard. And I think that, language has power, and there's lots of metaphors associated with it, and it can trigger an emotional response. And I think that it also matters for us as a collective, but even for teachers who are receiving information, for principals. If every time we get a certain piece of information, it's presented as a deficit, then sometimes we start making an association, this group equals deficit, right? And so how do we always question these associations that we're making and talking, if we really do believe in an asset-based approach, how do we think about the language that we use to describe performance on these assessments?
Yeah, and MAP isn't the only game in town in regards to assessment. I mean, there's other ways to assess kids. I mean, there's portfolio-based assessments that take into account a child's work, and it takes formative, and it's again, it takes different elements of what a child learns throughout the school year. Now it's harder to collect, but are we going to perpetuate inequity because of convenience, or are we really going to do the hard work and really look at how a whole child develops throughout the school year in a balanced way with an equity lens? And I think that's a very serious question we really need to ask ourselves, because again, we will continue to have these conversations, and maybe we'll see kids perform better in MAP. But when I looked at the longer report in regards to some of the assessments, again the years that we went up, everybody went up, but the gap was still there. So to me, there is a problem with the ruler that we're using. So let's look at another way. I mean, MAP is not the only way to assess kids. There are different assessments. There are different ways to assess how children can succeed, and it takes into account the whole child. It's harder to do, but it's something worth exploring as a school district, as a board, as administrators, to really change the game in regards to how we assess children's success in school and in life.
It's just, we were making some inroads into the gap, though. It's just still large. So I think it's important to note.
I would just add, and I agree, that our teachers are paying attention to those other metrics. We are using this in the frame of a strategic benchmark scorecard as our indices that we initiated in this plan. However, every day, our teachers pay attention to the whole child. Our reading workshop framework, our reading workshop and our writing workshop use a different methodology for thinking about that. And that's the value and the investment in terms of making sure that continued, because it's changing the way in which teachers approach how they're assessing and thinking about the students in front of them, and including planning around culturally relevant practices, for example. That is one of the things that we'll be lifting much more deeply in the year to come. I also would say that when you look backwards, that's one of our teachers participated this past year. We were implementing while learning a curriculum. Our teachers were doing that. And so there was a lot of that dual process going on. And so I would say that they engage in the workshop conference, so the reading workshop conference, where teachers are spending time with an individual student to assess how they're responding to a text. Are they in the right book? Are they developing the right comprehension strategy? Are they making the right moves in terms of the strategies? And so, to your point, there are every day I would argue that our teachers, now I'm not saying they're all doing it to the same level of quality, and I think that that's the power and the benefit of professional learning and why we've engaged, and we need to continue to engage in a continuous improvement cycle. I'll just add one other thing in terms of bringing in other metrics. The 5 essentials is definitely, so I mentioned the school work planning process. So over the summer, we found time where principals worked with the RAD department and with our school work plan to look at the 5 essentials and then do a crosswalk between our scores on this MAP assessment measure and then the trust in our building, and recognizing that those two. I always say that, that we often want to drill into like the MAP scores individually, and there's a lot to learn there, but we also have to look at the curriculum and how it's responding towards things like perseverance and growth mindset and all these other quote unquote soft skills that play a role in this work.
So I just want to say, I hope that none of these comments gave the appearance that I don't have faith and trust in our teachers, and the fact that they do love and care for every student that they're working with every day. But just also looking at the realities of institutional practices that continue to perpetuate things unintentionally. And I realize there's one other thing that I forgot to mention is as a Black student that did not come from very much means, that did not have a lot of the things that my peers had, but also scored in the 99th percentile, the damage in not recognizing also that we have Black students that perform highly and we have lots of students from lots of different backgrounds that perform highly on these assessment tools. And so that also gets lost in the mix of not having a broad vocabulary for how we are describing how students are performing when we're talking about them in mass groups. And so just constantly pushing that is not necessarily a criticism of any individual, but hopefully challenging all of us to think about how we're perpetuating things unintentionally.
And Reardon's data are really clear that this is an outstanding school district. Our high performers are some of the highest performers in the United States. And our kids who are striving to learn are at or above average. And so that's necessary, but it's not sufficient to be able to make the gains that we want to make. And that's the commitment that we have as we double down on the work that we're doing.
I just wanted to add one thing. So one of the things that I feel like we could do a better job at is helping our parents understand this information and understand the scorecard that they get. I think that they are our partners in our children's education, and I know that not all teachers have the time to sit down individually with each parent to explain the scorecard. But I really think if we were able to somehow, through open forums or maybe like a video online, to explain to parents what those scores mean and how they could, support their kids, because I think that the information is a lot for us in trying to decipher that information, let alone for a parent who might not understand what that information means and what areas that they can help support their child. So just as we're looking at that information, how do we include parents in this conversation?
And I think that's all the more reason that it's important to have broader measures that we can be discussing with parents so that it isn't all looking like, doom and gloom for certain groups. And I think that's really what this is about. I think we know that in classrooms, individually with teachers, good things are happening and the teachers can see the whole child for who he or she is. But, at the level that we're looking at it, it is an institutional practice that we need to look at that does then affect students and families, even if they're maybe getting a different message from their individual teacher. The message that we give also matters. So I think that's really the point that we're trying to make up here. So I am going to propose we were supposed to, the enrollment update was going to be an FYI and then was pulled to discussion. I'm going to propose, if it's okay with everybody, that we hold off until we have the opening of schools report on a broader discussion of enrollment, given the lateness of the hour.
Good idea.
Okay, excellent.
I second.
That's right. Well, I'll take the informal vote on that. And then, do we have any specific committee reports that anybody wants to report on? Joyce Paul?
Joyce Paul. No.
No, we're good.
Okay. With that then, at 10:20, I call this meeting adjourned.